Fire your entire team by Monday, or I'll do it for you. My wife, the new manager, demanded. I nodded quietly. What she didn't know, they weren't just my team. Monday morning, when the board walked in, her face went white because I should have known the evening was headed straight for the corporate version of hell. The second Monica placed a manila folder beside my plate like it was the main course. The way she slid it across the table, slow, deliberate, with that CEO smirk that could curdle milk, told me dinner wasn't about the food. It was about execution. My execution, specifically. We were having grilled salmon, roasted asparagus, and marital tension. You could have cut it with a butter knife and still had leftovers. Monica took a sip of her wine, crossed one leg over the other, and said in her boardroom calm voice, "Fire your entire team by Monday, or I'll do it for you." Now, for the record, I've heard some messed up dinner conversations in my life. Once, her cousin announced she was quitting her job to sell crystals to dogs. Another time, her dad told me my handshake was soft, like an indecisive pancake. But this was a new category of awkward. I nodded, the polite version of fainting. Right? Okay. That was the sound of a man trying to keep his soul from sprinting out the back door. Inside, I was doing mental yoga. Deep breaths. Don't flip the table. Don't remind her I hired half those people because she said, "You should find passionate, creative types." Don't ask how she became a self-appointed efficiency czar for the company we both technically worked for. Me in operations, her in strategic transformation, which, by the way, is corporate code for I make PowerPoints about firing people. Monica forked another piece of salmon, blissfully unaware she'd just launched a small emotional grenade. "You've been too sentimental," she said. "You treat your team like a family." "Yeah," I muttered. Crazy concept. Humans being treated like humans. She ignored the sarcasm, which, honestly, should be listed as one of her core skills. "They're not performing at optimal capacity," she continued. "You can't save everyone. Efficiency is leadership." I stared at the folder like it was radioactive. "And firing 8 people before Monday makes me efficient." She dabbed her lips with a napkin, perfectly calm. "Decisive," she corrected. "It makes you decisive." I wanted to tell her decisive was ordering fries instead of a salad, not throwing your entire department into unemployment, but I kept that thought in my internal memo. My marriage had already survived 2 home renovations and 1 joint Google Calendar. I wasn't sure it could survive sarcasm about her new title. Still, I tried. "Mon, these people aren't dead weight. They're the reason we didn't get sued last quarter when that fire alarm turned into a small volcano." She didn't even blink. "Then they've served their purpose." Served their purpose? Like they were old printer cartridges. My fork clinked against the plate. She didn't flinch. The woman had the emotional range of a granite countertop. I looked at her across the table, the perfectly symmetrical hair, the designer blouse that probably cost more than Marco's car. And I thought, this is what happens when you marry a woman who reads business books for fun. "I'll need confirmation by Sunday," she added casually, sipping her Pinot like it was communion wine. I smiled. Or at least my face made a shape similar to smiling. "Sure," I said. "I'll think about it." But we both knew I wouldn't. The rest of dinner was silence. Not the peaceful kind, like a Sunday morning with pancakes and soft jazz, but the kind that hums like a fluorescent light in a bad office. After dessert, or what would have been dessert if anyone still had an appetite, I cleared the plates. She opened her laptop at the table, because of course she did. "Don't stay up late overthinking it," she said, already typing. "You'll feel better once it's done." Yeah, just like how people feel better after dental surgery. I walked into the living room, loosened my tie, and stared at the city lights bleeding through the blinds. I could see our office building from here, 30 floors of glass, ambition, and unpaid overtime. Somewhere in that glowing box were the people she wanted me to fire. People who'd stuck with me through the messiest projects, broken code, late nights, and malfunctioning coffee machines that smelled like despair. They weren't just my team. They were the reason I still believed the company had a soul. Nina, the coder who listened to heavy metal while fixing bugs faster than most people could blink. Marco, the designer who doodled his way into brilliance and called every finished layout his baby. Zara, the client manager who could talk a raging CEO into calm using nothing but empathy and a pen. Monica thought she was trimming fat. I thought she'd picked the wrong body. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our old team group chat. Special Solutions. The name started as a joke because our department was technically unofficial, a temporary task force that kept refusing to die. I typed out one word, green space. That was our code word. It meant emergency meeting, but it also meant bring snacks. This might suck. I added, 7 p.m. tomorrow. Bring snacks. We might cry. Then I hit send. I spent the rest of the night pacing like a man preparing for trial. I'd seen Monica in work mode before, polished, terrifying, efficient, but this was something else. She'd gone full Thanos, except instead of snapping fingers, she was sending HR emails. By midnight, I'd opened the folder. Inside were performance graphs, salary reports, and a neat little summary titled Redundant Roles, Departmental Streamlining Proposal. Translation: 8 names, 8 pink slips, and 1 marriage on thin ice. I flipped through the pages, reading the bullet points that reduced real people to metrics. Low output, overlapping responsibilities, non-essential to core functions. Non-essential. Right. Like water is non-essential to soup. The next morning, I dragged myself into the office running on caffeine and spite. The lobby smelled like corporate success and faint regret. Too much perfume, too much ambition. My reflection in the elevator doors looked like someone who'd just survived a motivational seminar. When I reached my floor, I could see them, my team, through the glass walls. Nina was bobbing her head to music that only she could hear. Marco was arguing with Photoshop, and Zara was multitasking so fast, she looked like she was auditioning for Cirque du Soleil. They waved when they saw me. I waved back, pretending everything was fine. Classic management move. But inside, my brain was a war zone. Half of me wanted to grab Monica's folder, march into HR, and light it on fire. The other half wanted to find a smarter way. Something poetic. Something satisfying. When lunch rolled around, Nina wandered into my office holding a donut like it was evidence. You okay, boss? You've got that planning a coup face again. I chuckled. What does that face look like? Like you're about to smile, but remembered you work here. She wasn't wrong. I waved her off. Just thinking about efficiency. She rolled her eyes. Ugh, the E-word. Monica again. I didn't answer, but she didn't need me to. Nina had a sixth sense for corporate nonsense. You tell her that without us, this company would still be sending invoices by carrier pigeon. Noted, I said, trying not to grin. By the time 5 p.m. rolled around, I decided. If Monica wanted a war of efficiency, I'd give her one. But it wouldn't be fought with layoffs or memos. It would be fought with something rarer in our building, truth. That night, I sat in my car outside Greenspace, the local park by the old coffee shop we used to haunt back when deadlines felt optional. I watched the sunset turn the sky that tired office gray into something human. My phone buzzed. One by one, the messages popped up. Nina, got chips. Marco, got beer. Zara, got backup emotional support tissues. Sam, got receipts. Literal receipts. I exhaled. Yeah, these were my people. Tomorrow, I'd tell them everything. About Monica's ultimatum. About the deadline. About the plan that was forming in the back of my caffeine-addled brain. But for now, I just sat there, staring at the horizon and thinking about how marriages and companies both fall apart the same way, quietly, over dinner, while someone passes the salt. I looked down at the folder on my passenger seat. Fire your entire team, it whispered in my head. I smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. Sure, honey, I said aloud, but you first. And just like that, the idea took root, small, sharp, and utterly satisfying. Greenspace Park was where bad dates went to die and conspiracies went to be born. It was the kind of place where people did yoga in the grass while pretending not to judge anyone eating nachos. I was sitting on a bench under a lamppost that buzzed like a mosquito with anxiety, waiting for my team to arrive. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to ask them to help me save their jobs by technically pretending to lose them. You know, standard Thursday night stuff. One by one, they appeared, looking like a ragtag band of office superheroes who'd gotten lost on the way to Comic-Con. Nina was first, hoodie pulled over her head, sunglasses on, carrying a tote bag labeled, definitely not a laptop. She sat down beside me, tore open a bag of pretzels, and said, So, boss, is this a meeting or an intervention? Bit of both, I said. Except the addiction is being employed. Next came Marco, balancing 2 coffees and a 6-pack. I brought courage, he said, nodding at the beer. And caffeine, for optimism. God bless your Italian heart, I muttered. Zara showed up last, punctual as always, wearing that calm, crisis-ready expression that made clients feel safe and me feel like an underperforming intern. She took one look at my face and said, "Monica." I nodded. "Monica." She sighed, like she'd been expecting this day since the Renaissance. What did she do? Wants me to fire everyone by Monday. The silence that followed could have powered the entire city grid. Then Nina swore softly, in a way that would make an HR rep combust. Marco dropped one of the coffees. Zara folded her arms, like she was hugging an invisible baby made of stress. "She's serious?" Marco asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Dead serious," I said. She slid the folder across the dinner table like a dessert menu. "That's messed up," Nina said. "You guys don't even eat dessert." "Focus," I said, rubbing my temples. "We have a weekend to fix this before she does something irreversible." "So," Sam asked from behind us. I hadn't even noticed him arrive, because of course the accountant moves like a ghost. "What's the plan? Cry? Stage a coup? Fake our deaths?" "Option 4, I said. "All of the above, but legally." They gathered in a loose circle, beer cans popping open like punctuation marks in our collective panic. "I have a plan," I said. "It's complicated." Marco groaned. "Every time you say that, we end up in a storage closet with 6 laptops, a pizza, and emotional trauma." "True," Nina said. "Remember the firewall project? Remember the time we almost got banned from using Slack?" I raised my hands. "Okay, yes, but this one's bigger. And sneakier." They leaned in. The park lights flickered, a perfect cue for dramatic conspiracy energy. I took a deep breath. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make Monica think she's winning." Nina tilted her head. "As in, we just sit here and cry elegantly until she feels fulfilled?" "No," I said. "We act broken. Pack boxes. Delete files. Hand in access cards. Play along. Every bit of corporate melodrama you can think of. Perform it like you're auditioning for The Office, Tragedy Edition." Marco blinked. "You want us to fake being fired?" "Exactly. But behind the scenes, we'll document everything we've done. The projects, the results, the savings, every late-night fix. We'll create a report so detailed that even an AI accountant would cry reading it. We'll make it impossible for her to justify cutting us. And when the board sees it, they'll realize she's about to crash the company." Zara finished, catching on fast. "Bingo," I said. Sam nodded slowly. "So basically, we're staging a fake death to prove we're still alive." "Pretty much." He cracked open another beer. "Cool. I've always wanted to be in a corporate zombie movie." Nina leaned back, pretending to think. "I don't know, boss. This sounds like a lot of emotional labor for people who are already underpaid." "Yeah," I said. "But at least you'll get to make Monica look stupid. Consider it performance art." That perked her right up. "Oh, I'm in. You had me at make Monica look stupid." "Same," Marco added. "But what if this backfires? What if she actually fires us before we can pull this off?" I shrugged. "Then we go down swinging. And by swinging, I mean we leak the data to the board." Zara smirked. "You've thought this through." I smiled. "It's either this or therapy, and therapy doesn't come with health insurance anymore." They all laughed, that tired, slightly manic laugh people do when they realize they're about to make bad life choices together. I stood up, brushing off my jeans. "We'll start tomorrow. Pack your things. Cry convincingly. Make it look like a disaster. But behind the tears, keep working. Quietly. Efficiently. We'll pull every number, chart, and email we need. This is our heist." Nina pointed at me with a pretzel. "You know you're basically describing an Ocean's 11 sequel no one asked for, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Ocean's 8 employees." Sam raised his can. "To the saddest heist in corporate history." We clinked beers, and the sound felt both ridiculous and heroic. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The breeze rustled the trees, and the park lights hummed in rhythm with our collective anxiety. Then Zara broke the silence. "You realize she's not just doing this for efficiency, right?" I turned to her. "Meaning?" "Meaning she's angling for something bigger. People don't make enemies out of whole teams unless they're trying to make a point." I sighed. "You think she's going for Charles's job? Or the board's attention?" Zara said. "Either way, she's not going to stop until she looks like the savior of the company." "Then we just have to beat her at her own story," I said. Nina grinned. "Plot twist, we're the heroes." Exactly. Marco groaned, dramatic as always. Great. So we're underpaid, overworked, and now we have to act? I didn't sign up for method unemployment. Relax, I said. You'll be fine. Just look sad, type fast, and don't get caught smiling. He gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. We stayed in the park longer than planned, mapping out details like criminals who didn't realize they were the good guys. Sam would track the finances, Zara would compile client testimonials, Nina and Marco would gather design and code metrics, and I'd assemble the grand narrative. The story that would prove Monica's plan wasn't efficiency. It was corporate self-sabotage with better lighting. At one point, a jogger slowed down and said, "You guys look intense." "We're planning a revolution," Nina said deadpan. The jogger blinked. "Cool," he said, jogging off faster than before. We all cracked up. By 9 p.m., the group started dispersing. Marco headed to the train, Nina waved with her pretzel bag like a flag, and Sam muttered something about pivot tables before vanishing into the night like an Excel ghost. Zara lingered. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Nope," I said, "but it beats letting her win." She nodded, thoughtful. "You know she'll make it personal, right?" "She already did." "Still," she said softly, "be careful. You're her husband, but that doesn't make you untouchable." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I've noticed." She gave my shoulder a squeeze before walking away. Her heels clicked against the pavement, fading into the kind of silence that leaves you alone with your thoughts, and those thoughts are never kind. I sat back down on the bench, staring at the lamppost light flickering above me. The buzzing matched the static in my head. Somewhere between the sarcasm and the strategy, I realized how insane this all was. A husband and wife, locked in an office Cold War. She wanted to prove efficiency. I wanted to prove humanity. Both of us wanted to be right. The thing about working in corporate America is that it trains you to smile while you're drowning. You master the art of cheerful self-preservation. Tonight, though, something shifted. This wasn't just about saving jobs anymore. It was about proving that people still mattered more than charts. My phone buzzed. A message from Monica. "Don't forget to confirm terminations by end of day Sunday. I'll handle communication with HR if you're too busy." Too busy. Right. Like being emotionally blackmailed over dinner counts as busy. I typed back. "All under control." Then, after a moment, I added a period. That one extra dot of passive-aggressive punctuation. I leaned back and looked at the park again. The benches, the trees, the flickering lights. And for the first time in weeks, I felt alive. Terrified, yes, but alive. We had a weekend to pull off the most ridiculous act of rebellion this company had ever seen. And maybe, just maybe, we'd remind everyone, including Monica, that efficiency means nothing without the people who make the damn system work. The night breeze carried the faint smell of popcorn from a nearby vendor. I bought a bag, sat back down, and toasted it to the invisible skyline. "To teams who don't go quietly," I said under my breath. And the lamppost buzzed back, like it agreed. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd become the invisible guy in my own company, I would have laughed, adjusted my tie, and asked if you needed coffee or therapy. But here we are. Somewhere between being the dependable dude with a color-coded calendar and the guy who fixes office problems no one else even sees, I became the ghost people accidentally email when they're talking trash about management. And somehow, I'm fine with that. See, invisibility is perks. You get to observe. And when you observe long enough in corporate America, you start to see patterns, like who actually runs things. Spoiler. It's never the people in corner offices, or how meetings could have been emails but are instead emotional marathons with PowerPoint visuals. Back when I started, I was the organized one. You know the type, the guy who brings extra pens, knows where the coffee filters are, and remembers Brenda's cat's name because Brenda once cried during a quarterly review. People said things like, "You're so reliable," which is code for, "We're going to dump all our panic on you when this project explodes." Then came the quarter from hell. Charles, the CEO, had just fired half of middle management in a move he called lean restructuring. Lean my ass. We were so lean we could have fit inside a shoebox. The company was bleeding clients and morale faster than HR could schedule. Resilience workshops. Charles gathered the remaining staff and said the words that should be printed on every corporate tombstone. "We just need to work smarter." He looked at me, the invisible guy, and said, "You're good with systems. Fix it. Fix what exactly? I asked. He waved his hand. All of it. Oh, sure. Just all of it. No biggie. I could have said no. But I had that early career optimism where you think effort equals reward and loyalty equals security. Rookie mistake. Instead, I asked for a small team and an unused storage room because that's what you do when you're trying to fix chaos. You hide from it. He gave me both. Probably figured it was cheaper than a therapist. That's how Special Solutions started. 1 broken coffee maker, 2 flickering lights, and 8 people who were too stubborn to quit. Nina came first. She was an IT rebel who spoke fluent sarcasm and wrote code like she was exorcising demons. Her emails usually included at least one meme and ended with, "Please fix your own mistakes, KTHX." HR didn't like her. I adored her. Then Marco showed up. Graphic designer. Dress shirts unbuttoned too low, confidence levels too high. The man could design an interface so intuitive it made you feel stupid for not thinking of it first. He once said, "Design is about emotion," which sounded pretentious, but then he fixed our entire client dashboard in 2 days, so we forgave him. Zara was the last to join. Client manager. Sweet voice, lethal memory. She could recall every angry client from the last 5 years like she kept them in a mental Rolodex. Her job was to calm people down before they called their lawyers. Honestly, she deserved hazard pay. We became the company's emergency plumbers, the people they called when something exploded, figuratively or literally. One time, the fire alarm malfunctioned and sprayed foam instead of sound. We fixed it. Another time, the new software release deleted customer payment histories. We rebuilt it from backups. Every crisis had our fingerprints on the solution, but we didn't brag. That's the thing about quiet workers. We build, others get the credit. Which is fine until someone like Monica shows up. Now, back then, Monica wasn't the efficiency czar. She was just my girlfriend who occasionally wore blazers for fun. She worked at another firm, all finance and strategy, and our biggest argument was about which coffee shop had the superior cold brew. When she joined our company a few years later, I thought it'd be cool. Married power couple, same workplace, same dreams. I even pictured us high-fiving in the hallway after saving the company from disaster. You know, corporate romance with spreadsheets. Instead, what I got was a masterclass in stealth survival. When Monica started her efficiency crusade, I didn't panic. I figured she'd poke around, trim some budgets, maybe eliminate that weird middle layer of people whose entire job is replying all. But no, she went full Marie Kondo on human beings. At first, I tried to reason with her. "Hey, babe, maybe don't call my department redundant in front of HR." She'd smile sweetly and say, "It's not personal, darling. It's strategic." That's when I knew I was dealing with 2 Monicas. The one who kissed me goodnight, and the one who plotted staffing reductions like a Bond villain with a spreadsheet fetish. So, I learned stealth. If she was going to live in the spotlight, I'd master the shadows. If she wanted numbers, I'd show results that numbers couldn't argue with. And I'd do it quietly. Invisibility training. Day 1. Stop talking in meetings. Just listen. Let the executives argue over buzzwords like synergy and growth trajectory. Meanwhile, you take notes on what they actually need, not what they say they need. Then you solve it before they notice. Day 2. Make yourself boring. Unthreatening. Wear neutral shirts. Smile politely. Be forgettable. People don't target what they don't see. By month 6, I perfected the art. My team and I existed in the blind spot of the company. We fixed, we built, we prevented disasters, and every once in a while, someone upstairs would say, "Didn't we already solve that issue?" Yep, we did. You're welcome. Charles knew what we were worth. That's why he left us alone. He wasn't the touchy-feely type, but he understood value, and we were quietly printing it. Still, success doesn't stay invisible forever. One Tuesday, Charles called me into his office, a place that smelled like expensive pens and quiet dread. He gestured for me to sit, looking over a pile of reports like he was reading tarot cards. "Your team," he said, "has saved us more money than our sales division made last quarter." I blinked. "Is that good or bad?" He smirked. "Depends who you ask." He leaned forward. "I'm promoting you to operations manager. You'll have a bigger budget, more oversight, and, unfortunately, more meetings." "Meetings," I said. "The corporate afterlife." He laughed. "Keep doing what you're doing, but from a higher chair." I walked out feeling 10 feet tall. Then I made the rookie mistake of telling Monica. That's when things got complicated. Monica congratulated me with champagne and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. That's wonderful, she said. Now we can finally work closer. Closer. That word aged poorly. Within a few months, she'd been promoted too, head of efficiency and strategic realignment. I'm not saying she lobbied for it, but let's just say she advised Charles a lot on what the company needed. Our marriage turned into a merger. Meetings about meetings, shared Google Docs, and dinner conversations that felt like performance reviews. She'd say things like, "We need to improve synergy between departments." And I'd say, "We need to improve synergy between us." She didn't laugh. Our house filled up with buzzwords. Optimization, lean methodology, cross-functionality. I swear one night I woke up to her mumbling quarterly deliverables in her sleep. And through it all, I stayed invisible. Not because I wanted to, but because it kept me alive. Whenever she started digging into departmental performance, I'd subtly redirect her. "You should look at marketing," I'd say. "They love efficiency reports." She'd nod, dive into marketing like a shark, and I'd have a few weeks of peace. It became a dance. Her audits, my evasions. Her spreadsheets, my countermetrics. And weirdly, it worked. We balanced each other. Her spotlight, my shadows. Until recently. Until the dinner. That night at Greenspace Park, when I told my team about the ultimatum, I realized how deep this invisible guy thing had gone. They trusted me because I'd always been the calm in the storm, the one who saw the chaos but never flinched. But I also realized I'd built a system that depended entirely on staying unseen. And now Monica had dragged me right into the light. She wanted me to fire the people who made me invisible in the first place. The same people who fixed problems so fast management forgot they existed. And that wasn't just cruel. It was stupid. See, companies don't survive on leadership speeches. They survive on the quiet folks, the coders, designers, communicators, and accountants who show up every day, solve problems, and get zero credit. The invisible ones. I thought about all the years of late-night fixes, pizza-fueled weekends, and quick updates that turned into 10-hour marathons. About how my team and I kept this company alive without fanfare or fame. And suddenly, I wasn't just angry. I was motivated. If Monica wanted to expose us, fine. I'd let her. But she'd regret thinking visibility equals control. Because being invisible doesn't mean powerless. It means patient, strategic, ready. I left work that night later than usual. The janitor waved. I waved back. He said, "Burning the midnight oil again?" I smiled. "Nah. Just learning how to disappear and reappear at the right time." He chuckled. "Stealth training, huh?" Exactly. And for the first time in years, I felt like being invisible wasn't a weakness. It was my weapon. There are managers, and then there's Monica, my wife, my boss, and apparently, the reincarnation of every corporate buzzword ever invented. When she became the company's new efficiency lead, people expected innovation. What they got was a woman who could smell wasted potential from a mile away and had no problem labeling it redundant. Her first day on the job, she walked into headquarters like she was there to bless the building. Hair perfect, heels clicking with the confidence of someone who'd already memorized the floor plan and everyone's salary. HR introduced her to the staff, and she smiled that charming, camera-ready smile that said, "I will destroy you, but politely." "Efficiency," she began, standing at the front of the conference room like she was about to announce a war strategy, "is a muscle." Everyone nodded, pretending to understand. I sat in the back, coffee in hand, wondering if she knew she'd just declared herself the corporate gym trainer from hell. Then she added, "And I'm here to make sure we flex it." I nearly choked on my coffee. When you're married to someone like Monica, you learn to read her like a stock chart. Small uptick, she's proud. Sudden drop, she's furious. That first week, the line was climbing fast. She'd printed new posters with motivational quotes like, "Trim the excess, keep the best." You know, like a hedge trimmer slogan, but with fonts that screamed PowerPoint enthusiasm. To her, numbers were people, and people were just line items that talked too much. She didn't visit our department, of course. We worked 2 floors below her in what used to be a storage space, and Monica didn't do storage spaces. Her natural habitat was the executive wing. Bright lights, scented air diffusers, and enough glass to reflect her own confidence from 12 different angles. She reviewed reports through her tablet like a judge reading guilty verdicts. If a department had more than 3 employees or used words like collaboration or process time, she flagged it for assessment. Translation: someone was getting the axe before lunch. I remember overhearing her in a meeting one day. The wall was thin enough that her voice carried down the hall. "There's too much overlap in operations," she said. "We need to cut inefficiency by 30% this quarter." Someone, probably an intern, asked timidly, "Won't that affect productivity?" Monica laughed softly, like a queen amused by peasantry. "Not if you do it right." That's when I realized she didn't think in faces. She thought in figures. At home, it wasn't much different. Dinner became debriefing sessions. "Charles wants a presentation by Friday," she'd say, stabbing her salad like it owed her money. "Half these departments can't justify their existence." I'd sip my wine and mutter, "We're all just living on borrowed Excel sheets." She'd glance up, half smiling. "Don't be dramatic, darling. You know I'm doing what's necessary." Necessary. Another word that had lost all meaning in our marriage. The woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who used to text me pictures of sunsets and send dumb memes at midnight, was now more fascinated by fiscal quarters than human emotion. She didn't notice that our date nights had turned into performance reviews. One night, she brought her tablet to bed. I swear, that thing was the third person in our relationship. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she scrolled through yet another department analysis. "Do you ever stop working?" I asked. She smiled without looking away. "Do you ever stop worrying?" "Not when I'm married to an efficiency expert." "Then I'm doing my job," she said, tapping away like she was filing my complaint in the cloud. At work, her influence spread fast. HR started using her phrases. "We're optimizing workflows," they said, which meant firing people with better words. Departments were pitted against each other like gladiators in a spreadsheet coliseum. Everyone wanted to prove their worth before the next audit. She had this way of framing destruction as improvement. "We're simplifying the structure," she'd say, "flattening the hierarchy." Translation: she was chopping off rungs of the ladder, and no one knew if theirs was next. You know what's funny? She never once came down to our floor to actually meet the team she wanted to streamline. Not once. I told her, "You might want to talk to them, get a sense of what we actually do." She gave me that patient, condescending smile reserved for husbands and interns. "I've seen the data, love. I know what they do." No, she didn't. She knew what the graphs said. But graphs don't show the night Nina stayed until 3 a.m. debugging a system crash, or the morning Marco skipped his cousin's wedding to redesign the client portal. Graphs don't show Zara smoothing over angry clients with nothing but empathy and caffeine. Graphs don't bleed. The worst part? She wasn't wrong about some things. The company was bloated. There were people getting paid 6 figures to forward emails. But she couldn't see the difference between inefficiency and humanity. One day, I tried to show her. "Mon, take a look at this," I said, pulling up a file on my laptop. "Here's what my team's been handling behind the scenes. Client recovery, system optimization, hell, even the fire alarm fix." She skimmed it like someone reading the back of a cereal box. "That's great, but none of this aligns with our new operational goals." "Our goal," I said slowly, "is to stay in business." She blinked. "And we will, once we're leaner." "Lean doesn't mean functional," I shot back. "You can have a 6-pack and still die of dehydration." She frowned, the kind of frown that meant, "Don't push me in public." So I didn't. But inside, I knew this was going to get ugly. Rumors started spreading. People whispered that Monica was building her empire, that she was the CEO's favorite new toy, that the wife of operations was quietly cutting her way to a promotion. Some said she had the board's ear. Others said she had their wallets. I tried not to listen. You don't want to believe the gossip when it's about your own spouse. But the signs were there. She had lunch with Charles twice in 1 week. She stayed late, reviewing metrics. And one day, she moved her office to the executive floor, citing workflow efficiency. I asked, "Workflow or view?" She smiled. "Both." It wasn't jealousy. It was suspicion. You could see it in the way she started treating me like an employee instead of a husband. Every conversation felt like a performance review. Every dinner like a KPI meeting. When she finally got around to our department, it wasn't to visit. It was to audit. She didn't even look around, didn't notice the worn-out desks or the patchy ceiling tiles we'd fixed ourselves. She just glanced at the reports and said, "So this is Special Solutions. Cute name. Yeah, Nina said under her breath. Like calling a bomb squad Sparkle Patrol. Monica smiled that professional smile again. You've all done great work, but I think we've reached a point where automation can handle most of this. Marco blinked. Automation? You mean replacing us with software? If that's what efficiency requires, she said. Zara crossed her arms. And when the software breaks, should we just send it an apology email? Monica's eyes flicked toward me, sharp as glass. I can see why you like them, she said. They sound just like you. Then she turned and left, heels clicking away like a metronome counting down the company's demise. That night, I asked her point blank, what's your end game? She didn't hesitate. To make this company the most efficient in the industry. At what cost? She looked up from her laptop, genuinely confused. What do you mean? I mean people, morale, trust, the part of a company that isn't in a spreadsheet. She sighed, as if I'd just asked her to care about weather forecasts on Mars. You always make things emotional. It's business. It's our business, I said. Our team, our people. She tilted her head. Correction, it's my project. There it was. The quiet declaration of war. I stared at her for a long time, realizing that somewhere along the way, we'd switched sides. She thought I was sentimental. I thought she'd forgotten how to be human. And maybe we were both right. By the end of that week, everyone knew what was coming. Monica's audit report circulated like a death notice. Operational redundancies identified. That was us. Immediate restructuring recommended. That was code for execution scheduled. When she handed me the official directive, my own personal pink slip delivery assignment, I almost admired the audacity. She didn't blink, didn't flinch, just handed it over like she was giving me a to-do list. Fire your team by Monday, she said. That's when I knew we weren't just married anymore. We were opponents in the same company arena. She'd taken her hedge trimmer to everything, budgets, departments, even the bridge between us. And I wasn't about to let her make me the next cut. You ever had to pretend to fail at something you're actually great at? It's like being told to throw a basketball game while your mom's in the stands with a camera. That was us, me and my 8-person dream team, about to perform the saddest office drama since the invention of team-building exercises. We were staging our own professional funeral. Friday morning, I walked into the office with two emotions fighting for dominance, guilt and caffeine. Nina had already started the charade. She was at her desk, packing her things into a cardboard box labeled "Definitely Not Crying." Marco was bubble wrapping his coffee mug like it was a family heirloom. Zara was pretending to shred files, even though the machine wasn't plugged in. We were acting, terribly, but in our defense, corporate America has never been known for its realism. Okay, team, I said, trying to sound confident while holding a stack of fake termination forms. Remember, the goal is to look defeated but dignified. We're giving the Academy Award Performance of the Year. Sad but strong. Nina sniffed loudly for effect. Do I look strong if I sob into a stapler? Perfect, I said. Method acting. Sam, our accountant, stood by the door like a funeral director. I told my wife I got laid off, he said flatly. You didn't need to. She already made me clean the garage, he interrupted. Commitment, Nina said approvingly. Respect. We all laughed, but there was a heaviness beneath it. Every chuckle felt like a countdown. Because here's the thing. We weren't just pretending to be fired. We were pretending to be powerless. And that's not easy when you've spent your whole career holding the company together with duct tape and unpaid overtime. By noon, the act was in full swing. Monica was making her rounds, tablet in hand, smile polished to corporate perfection. How's everyone doing? She asked as if she'd just handed out free vacations instead of pink slips. Super, I said, just boxing up my sense of self-worth. She didn't even react. Good. We'll need your handover documents by 5. Nina gave her a watery smile. Oh, don't worry. You'll get everything. Even the ghosts of our past deliverables. Monica's eyes narrowed slightly. She knew sarcasm when she heard it. She'd practically raised it. But she moved on, satisfied with her illusion of control. The moment she disappeared into the elevator, Zara exhaled so hard her bangs flew up. I swear, if she smiles one more time, I'm filing a noise complaint against her teeth. Marco peeked around the corner. Is she gone? For now, I said. Okay, phase 2, upload the backup. That's when the real work began. Our fake layoffs had bought us time. While Monica thought we were moping, We were actually moving files to a hidden server Sam set up under the name wellness_reports_2019. No one ever checks the wellness folder. HR avoids it like taxes. We documented everything. The bugs fixed, the client saves, the cost reductions, the all-nighters. We backed up screenshots, receipts, code versions, internal praise emails, every breadcrumb of proof that cutting us would gut the company. This is corporate warfare, Nina said, typing furiously. We're not just saving jobs. We're saving history. Marco leaned back, sipping from a beer disguised as a coffee cup. And revenge tastes like Excel formulas. We worked quietly, efficiently, invisible as ever, but this time, it was deliberate. We'd become a ghost department, haunting the company with competence. By 3 p.m., the act hit its emotional peak. I walked into the break room to find Zara dramatically handing out leftover office snacks like she was on Survivor. Take what you need, she said solemnly. Trail mix, chips, dignity. Bless you, Nina whispered, grabbing 2 granola bars. I swear, if we hadn't all been in danger of unemployment, we could have won an Emmy. But then, Monica came back. I spotted her reflection in the coffee pot before I saw her. She walked in, heels clicking like judgment itself. Everyone still here? She asked sweetly. Just finishing up, I said, forcing a smile. Wouldn't want to leave any loose ends. Her smile was surgical. Good. I appreciate your cooperation. She glanced at the boxes. You've been thorough. Oh, we believe in closure, I said. Complete, meticulous closure. If she noticed the extra monitor cables or the fact that half our screens were turned slightly away from her, she didn't show it. She left again, confident she'd just witnessed a clean exit. Jesus, Nina muttered when the elevator doors closed. She's like Mary Poppins with a pink slip fetish. Stay calm, I said. We're almost done. We just need to finalize the dossier. Sam nodded. Already compiling. You'll have the master file before 5. Perfect, I said. Let's end this week with the fakest layoff in company history. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around, our office looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic sitcom. Empty desks, unplugged lamps, a few boxes stacked dramatically near the door. The only thing missing was a sad acoustic soundtrack. I stood there for a second, taking it all in. This was our battlefield, and it looked heartbreakingly ordinary. I turned to the team. You guys did good. Now go home. Act devastated. And for the love of God, don't post anything on LinkedIn. Nina saluted with her coffee mug. Operation Pity Party, commence. Marco gave me a thumbs up. If she thinks we're gone, maybe she'll stop breathing down our necks. Zara smirked. Or she'll try to replace us with robots. Let her try, I said. We built this system so even the robots would call us for help. They laughed, and for a brief second, the exhaustion lifted. After everyone left, I sat alone in the quiet. The fake resignation letters were neatly arranged on Monica's desk. The lights flickered once, like even the building knew it was witnessing something stupidly poetic. I picked up my phone and called Charles. He answered on the second ring, voice tired. Please tell me this isn't another budget request. Nope, I said. Just letting you know Monica's efficiency phase is in full swing. My team's officially out, at least on paper. He was silent for a long moment. And off paper? Still working, I said. We've got proof of impact, client data, efficiency metrics. Everything we need to show the board she's about to blow up their golden goose. Charles sighed, the sound of a man trying to choose between loyalty and legal exposure. You're sure about this? As sure as a married man can be about sabotaging his wife's audit, I said. He chuckled despite himself. God help you if she finds out. Yeah, I said. God and HR. Fine, he said finally. I'll set up a board meeting for Monday. Be ready to show them what you've got. Always am. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, staring at Monica's office door. I loved her once for her drive, her precision, her belief that things could always be improved. Now I wasn't sure if she could even tell the difference between improving and destroying. But I'd be damned if I let her cut down the people who'd saved this place time and again. This wasn't just about jobs anymore. It was about pride. That night, I drove home later than usual. The city lights blurred through the windshield, each one a little reminder that the world doesn't care about corporate wars, it just keeps moving. When I walked in, Monica was already home, sitting at the kitchen counter with a glass of wine and her ever-present tablet. She looked up. You look tired. Productivity fatigue, I said. It's contagious. She didn't even smirk. Good. That means you're doing your part. I wanted to tell her I'd done more than my part, that I'd quietly built a defense she couldn't spreadsheet her way out of, but instead, I smiled. Yeah, I said. Everything's wrapped up. Perfect, she said, sipping her wine. See? You're learning. Oh, I was learning all right. Learning that sometimes the smartest move isn't fighting the system. It's making the system think it's winning while you build something better underneath. Saturday morning, the group chat was alive. Nina uploaded final backup. Feels weird pretending to be unemployed. Marco got drunk pretending to mourn myself. Very method. Zara. Monica texted me, wishing you luck on your next journey. I replied, see you Monday. Sam, God bless sarcasm. I smiled at my phone. They were ready. We were all ready. This was more than just rebellion. It was reclamation. A declaration of worth disguised as defeat. By the time Monday rolled around, we'd be standing in front of the board, exposing Monica's efficiency for what it really was. Reckless ambition dressed in a PowerPoint. But for now, I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, and whispered to no one in particular, showtime. And for the first time all week, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. There are Mondays, and then there are legendary Mondays. The kind that could either end your career or make you the star of every whispered hallway story for years. This one was shaping up to be both. I arrived at the office early, wearing the one suit I reserve for tax audits, funerals, and corporate showdowns. You know the one. Charcoal gray, slightly too tight in the shoulders, but makes you look like you've got your life together even when your soul is on fire. I'd even polished my shoes, which for me is the equivalent of lighting a prayer candle. Monica was already there. Of course she was. She lived for mornings like this: presentation day, performance day, judgment day. She stood at the head of the boardroom table, tablet in hand, tapping away with the calm menace of a Bond villain updating her evil PowerPoint. Her slides were already projected onto the massive screen. Efficiency wins, Q3. I almost clapped. It was like watching a magician set up her trick before you reveal where she hid the cards. I took my seat across from her. She gave me a polite nod. The kind reserved for someone you once loved, but now only tolerate because murder is frowned upon in the workplace. Morning, she said sweetly. Morning, I replied. Nice slides. I can practically smell the PowerPoint ambition from here. She didn't even look up. You know what they say, good data speaks for itself. So does karma. Her jaw tightened. Don't make this personal. Wouldn't dream of it, I said, smiling like a man holding the detonator to his own survival. At exactly 9 a.m., the board members started filing in. You could always tell their status by what they carried. The newer ones clutched notepads like shields. The veterans walked in with nothing but coffee and cynicism. Charles, our CEO, came in last, his face the usual mix of exhaustion and quiet regret for every decision that had led him here. Morning, everyone, he said. Let's make it a quick one. Quick one. Classic CEO phrase. Translation. I've already tuned out, but I'll pretend to care for 45 minutes. Monica began her presentation like she was conducting a symphony of self-importance. Her voice was smooth, her tone controlled, and her laser pointer moved across the screen like it had a master's degree in smugness. Over the last quarter, she began, we've identified inefficiencies totaling $1.4 million in potential savings. Streamlining key departments will allow us to allocate resources to innovation. I swear she said innovation like it was a sacred word that cured diseases. I looked around the table. Most of the board nodded along, hypnotized by the bar charts and her flawless presentation cadence. She was good, dangerously good. She flipped to the next slide, which listed all the departments she'd optimized. Then she paused dramatically before landing on ours. And this, she said, is the Operations Special Solutions team. Their functions, while once essential, have now been automated or absorbed into other divisions. I could feel my pulse quicken. The betrayal was so polished it could have been a TED Talk. She continued, removing redundant roles will not only save costs, but simplify oversight and reporting. I resisted the urge to stand up and yell, lady, we're the reason you still have a company to oversimplify. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, waiting. When she finished her spiel, Charles nodded slowly. Impressive work, Monica. I'll admit, This kind of analysis takes guts. She smiled modestly, like someone who just finished robbing a bank but wanted credit for the architecture. Thank you. I believe efficiency is the key to growth. That's one philosophy, I said. All eyes turned to me. Charles raised an eyebrow. You've got something to add, I assume? I smiled. Just a small demonstration. Monica's polite smile froze. Demonstration? Yeah, I said, standing up and straightening my tie. Since we're talking about efficiency, I thought it'd be useful to see what it looks like when it actually works. The room went quiet. You could feel the shift, the energy of people who suddenly realized they might be witnessing something historic or career-ending. At precisely 9:15, the double doors opened. In walked my team. 8 people who'd supposedly been terminated, marching in with laptops, coffee, and the kind of smug confidence that comes from knowing you're about to ruin someone's narrative. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mr. Rourke from the board actually blinked twice like his bifocals were lying to him. Weren't these folks fired? I said cheerfully. That was the rumor. Monica's smile had vanished completely. Her face was now a mix of confusion and dread, like someone who just realized the magician's assistant is holding the real saw. What is this? She asked, her voice tightening. This, I said, is the part where the truth interrupts your PowerPoint. I gestured for the team to take their seats along the wall. Allow me to reintroduce the Special Solutions team. Unofficially the group that's been keeping this company functional while the rest of us argue about synergy. The board looked interested now. Charles folded his arms, eyebrows raised. Go on. See, Monica's report here, very impressive charts, by the way, mentions inefficiencies. But what it doesn't mention are the results those inefficiencies produced. I clicked my laptop, projecting our report onto the screen beside hers. Slide 1. Results you forgot existed. The first graph was simple, client retention rates over the last 2 years. When we took over, I said, our client satisfaction score was 62%. Now it's 93%. That's not magic. That's Nina, who fixed the CRM system when IT told us it was hopeless. Nina gave a small wave. Next slide, cost savings. We cut overhead by $740,000 by optimizing vendor contracts. Marco and Zara handled that. Marco leaned back, smug grin in full effect. You're welcome. And when our flagship app crashed last winter, guess who rebuilt the backend overnight? That's Sam and Eduardo. Sam shrugged. I had nothing better to do. Laughter rippled through the room. Monica's tablet froze mid-tap. And remember the time our entire security system nearly got us sued because of a compliance error? I asked. We fixed that too. Quietly. I paused, letting it sink in. So if efficiency means firing the people who save your company from disaster, maybe we should redefine the word. The silence that followed was so thick you could spread it on toast. Then, out of nowhere, Jerome, the old-school board member who looked like he'd been around since typewriters, spoke up. You fired the people who actually saved us. Monica tried to recover. It's not about individuals. It's about structure. Systems. Jerome cut her off. Systems don't work without people who give a damn. I couldn't have scripted it better myself. Charles leaned forward, steepling his fingers. So, let me get this straight. Monica, your report recommended eliminating the department responsible for the majority of operational savings in the past 2 years. She hesitated. That's a misinterpretation of the data. Or, I said, a selective reading of it. Her eyes darted toward me, a warning flicker. But the board wasn't looking at her anymore. They were looking at my team. The real story was unfolding, and for once, we weren't invisible. Ms. Park, one of the board's newer members, turned to Nina. You run the coding systems, right? Yes, Nina said, leaning forward. And I also volunteer at the company's coding camp for kids. That's where I met your daughter. Actually, she's got a great head for logic. Ms. Park blinked. Oh, you're that Nina. Nina grinned. The one and only. I didn't even need to say anything after that. Connections speak louder than data. One by one, my team became real to them. Faces, not numbers. The woman who calmed angry clients. The designer whose work boosted sales. The accountant who found missing funds. And just like that, Monica's entire efficiency argument started collapsing like a bad Jenga tower. When I wrapped up, I turned back to Charles. So that's where we stand. You can keep chasing spreadsheets, or you can keep the people who make the numbers mean something. Charles rubbed his chin, impressed but pretending not to be. You've made your point. Monica, desperate, tried to salvage what was left. Look, no one's denying the team's contributions, but restructuring was necessary. Mr. Lang, the quietest board member until now, interrupted. Efficiency without effectiveness is just a tidy failure. Oof. That one hit harder than coffee after an all-nighter. Monica froze, color draining from her face. I swear I saw her blink twice, calculating whether to double down or surrender. She chose neither. She just said, quietly, I'll revisit the data. Charles leaned back. You do that. In the meantime, this team stays. I could have kissed the man. As the board members started packing up, Charles turned to me. That was gutsy. Gutsy or stupid? I asked. Little of both, he said with a grin. Good job. When the room finally emptied, Monica stood by the window, staring out at the skyline like she could fix it with sheer willpower. I walked over, hands in my pockets. You okay? She didn't look at me. You embarrassed me in front of the board. I defended my team. They're the same thing. I let out a dry laugh. And that's the problem, Mon. She turned to face me, eyes cold but glassy. You think you won something today? No, I said softly. I reminded them what winning actually looks like. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she picked up her tablet and walked out without another word. As the door closed, I exhaled for the first time in hours. The room still smelled faintly of tension and burnt ego. My team trickled in, waiting for my cue. Did we win? Marco asked. I grinned. We survived. That's better. Nina punched the air. Hell yeah, corporate survival mode. We all laughed, the sound echoing through the empty boardroom. It wasn't just relief, it was triumph. Because for once, we weren't invisible. And for the first time, Monica wasn't untouchable. They say silence after a storm feels peaceful, but that's a lie. It's not peace. It's the sound of everyone pretending they didn't just witness a train crash in business casual. The Monday boardroom meeting had ended with polite applause and quiet panic. The Special Solutions team was officially back from the dead. Monica's PowerPoint empire was crumbling, and I was suddenly the guy people whispered about in the hallway with phrases like, "Did you see that? And I thought they were married?" I walked out of that boardroom like I'd just defused a bomb with a butter knife. My heart was still thudding, my suit clinging to me like guilt, and the air felt thick enough to chew. My team followed behind me, all smirks and wide eyes. Nina whispered, "That was epic," while Marco said, "You looked like George Clooney if you worked in HR." I grinned, but I was too wired to enjoy it. The calm after chaos is never real calm. It's just the eye of the hurricane where you know the other side is waiting to smack you again. And that other side had a name, Monica. By the time I got to my office, she'd already left a note on my desk. No email, no Slack message, no "we need to talk." Just an old-fashioned handwritten note on company stationery. It read, "We need to discuss boundaries. Tonight. Boundaries. That's married people code for someone's about to cry or throw furniture." I sat there for a while, staring at the note like it might self-destruct. Zara popped her head in. You okay? Define okay. You survived a board meeting ambush and humiliated your wife in front of upper management. That's either heroic or suicidal. Probably both. I shrugged. Depends how dinner goes. She raised an eyebrow. You're still going home? It's either that or sleep in my car. And the car doesn't have Pinot Noir. Zara gave me a sympathetic smile. Well, if she kills you, we'll dedicate a coffee mug in your honor. Make sure it says, "He died doing the right thing," sort of. At home, the air was colder than the office AC. Monica was sitting on the couch, tablet in hand like it was a stress ball. She didn't look up when I walked in. I kicked off my shoes and stood there, feeling like a trespasser in my own living room. You embarrassed me, she said finally, her voice calm but sharp enough to shave ice. You almost dismantled my team, I said. She looked up, eyes dark. I did what was necessary. There's that word again, I said. Necessary. You keep using it like it's holy scripture. It is, she snapped. Someone has to make the hard decisions. I leaned against the wall. You're mistaking destruction for leadership. And you're mistaking sentiment for strategy. Sentiment keeps people showing up, I said. Strategy without heart is just a spreadsheet with a death wish. Her laugh was short, humorless. You always think you're so clever. You think the board will protect you now? You humiliated me. You made me look incompetent. I didn't make you look anything, I said evenly. You did that by trying to cut the people who actually hold this place together. For a second, I thought she might throw the tablet at me. Her jaw flexed. Her hands trembled just slightly. She rattled like a blender, fury and fear spinning together. Then she stood, smoothing her dress, regaining that mask of calm efficiency. "I'll recover," she said quietly. "I always do." That was the thing about Monica. She wasn't just ambitious. She was relentless. If she fell, she'd make sure someone else cushioned the landing. "I know," I said. "That's what scares me." She gave me a long, hard look. "You think you've won something?" "No," I said. "I just stopped losing." She turned away, grabbed her bag, and headed for the door. "Don't wait up." I didn't. The next morning at work, you could feel it, the tension, the gossip, the electric hum of people pretending they weren't watching. The boardroom fallout had spread faster than a group chat leak. Charles called me into his office. He looked like a man who'd slept 4 hours and regretted every one of them. "So," he said, "hell of a show yesterday." "Sorry," I said. "Didn't mean to turn it into a reality episode." He smiled tiredly. "Don't apologize. The board loved it. You reminded them that we still have humans here, not just balance sheets." "Glad to hear it," I said. "But," he added, "Monica's not taking it well." "Yeah, I noticed. She's requested access to the full financial reports for your department. Claims she wants to understand the discrepancies." I raised an eyebrow. Translation: she's going hunting. Charles sighed. "I can't deny her act." "Let her have it," I told Sam. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? She'll see the breadcrumbs." "That's the point," I said. "We're leaving her the trail." He smirked. "God, you're good at this." "I'm married to her," I said. "You learn defense mechanisms." Around 5, I decided to swing by her war room. The door was half open, lights spilling out onto the hallway like corporate stage lighting. She was hunched over her tablet, hair slightly out of place. Rare for her, which meant she was stressed. "Long day?" I asked. She didn't look up. "I'm fine." "You look fine," I said, leaning against the doorframe. In the "I'm about to delete someone's career" kind of way. She sighed. "I just want answers." "To what?" "To why your department's numbers don't align with the projected cost reductions." "Maybe because my department doesn't rely on fantasy math." She glared up at me. "You think this is funny?" "A little," I said. "You're auditing your husband for revenge. That's sitcom gold." She stood, tablet clutched tight. "I'm not your enemy." "Then stop acting like one." For a split second, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Hesitation, maybe guilt, but it was gone as fast as it came. She stepped closer, voice low. "You humiliated me. You made me look reckless in front of the people who decide our futures." I met her gaze. "No, Mon. You did that when you stopped listening to the people doing the work." She stared at me for a moment, then turned back to her files. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. I smiled. If I had $1 for every time I've heard that, I could retire. When I walked back to my office, Zara was waiting with 2 coffees. "How bad?" she asked. "She's digging," I said. "Deep. Should we worry?" "No," I said. "We've already set the trap. She just hasn't realized it yet." Zara raised her coffee in a toast. "To patience, then." "To stealth," I said. We clinked cups. By the time the sun set, the office had emptied out, leaving that strange stillness only corporate buildings have at night. The hum of servers, the faint echo of ambition bouncing off glass walls. I stood by the window, watching Monica's silhouette in the conference room, still moving, still searching. She was relentless, but so was I. The calm after the chaos wasn't peace, it was prep time. Because the next storm wasn't coming from the board. It was coming from her. And this time, I'd be ready. You can always tell when someone's hiding something by the way they hover over a spreadsheet like it's a diary. Monica had started coming into the office after hours, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., the kind of dedication that doesn't smell like loyalty. It smells like plotting. June from IT was the first to flag it. "Someone's logging into secure servers in the middle of the night," she said. Guess who? I didn't even need to guess. Monica's credentials had been used to open archived vendor files, financial audits, and one mysteriously renamed folder, Vanguard Consultation Drafts. That was the same vendor name we'd seen pop up before, back when other departments got restructured, and those same companies mysteriously contracted Vanguard for recovery support. Nina ran her usual digital witchcraft and found subtle edits in our project parameters, small enough not to break anything, but big enough to make results look off. It was elegant sabotage. She's creating the problem, Sam said, his tone dry as a tax memo. So she can sell the cure. I stared at the monitor. A self-made crisis with a premium solution attached. Classic corporate snake move. Marco muttered, "You married that." "Yeah," I said. "Turns out, I like fixer-uppers." We pulled every trace, logins, vendor records, digital footprints, and the story started to take shape. Monica had done this before at 3 prior companies. Same pattern. She'd trim a team, manufacture a disaster, then rescue the company through a conveniently timed consulting partner, Vanguard, or some clone version of it. "She's not an efficiency expert," Zara said. "She's a professional arsonist with a business card." So we set our own trap. Cameras, timestamp trackers, mirrored servers. We weren't just collecting data, we were building a case. Because when someone's whole career is built on burning bridges, eventually they light one too close to home. And if Monica wanted to play savior again, we'd be waiting with the receipts, the footage, and the match she used to start it all. There's a special kind of joy in watching a plan come together. The slow, delicious kind that feels like karma in a tailored suit. For weeks, Monica had been laying her little breadcrumbs, midnight logins, shadow edits, those conveniently accidental data mismatches. She thought she was orchestrating another efficiency miracle. What she didn't know was that we'd turned her grand performance into a live-streamed confession. It started on a Thursday night. I was in my office with Sam, surrounded by enough coffee cups to qualify as a recycling hazard. The hidden cameras were rolling. The mirrored server was waiting. Monica's access credentials pinged at 1:27 a.m. like clockwork. "There she is," Sam whispered. On the feed, Monica glided into the operations wing in heels, because of course she did. No one breaks into a data system in flats. She typed fast, efficient, practiced. Her screen mirrored onto ours, subtle parameter tweaks, document renames, a sneaky upload to a folder labeled Vendor Support Proposal, Vanguard. Sam muttered, "She's practically signing her own indictment." "Yeah," I said, but with formatting and bullet points. We had everything. Timestamps, screen recordings, audio, even a crystal-clear shot of her whispering into her phone. "We'll make them need us." The phrasing alone could have been framed in a museum exhibit titled Hubris, Exhibit A. The next morning, I walked into work like a man holding the ace of spades. Monica was in full swing. Fresh blazer, smug energy, probably thinking about the presentation she'd give tomorrow to fix the system she'd just broken. Friday came fast. The boardroom was set. Monica opened her laptop with the confidence of someone about to collect applause. Her presentation was titled Project Winton Recovery Initiative, Vanguard Partnership Proposal. She clicked through charts showing fabricated problems, system slowdowns, data errors, productivity drops. "Our solution," she announced, "is a vendor partnership that will stabilize our infrastructure at a projected cost of $2.3 million. I waited until she finished her pitch, then stood slowly. "Fascinating, but I think the board deserves a second opinion." She frowned. "Excuse me." I connected my laptop to the projector. "Let's take a look at what Project Winton actually looks like today." I ran the demo. Everything worked perfectly. Flawless performance, 0 errors. You could have heard a pin drop. Then I clicked to the next slide, footage of Monica, late at night, accessing the system, altering numbers, whispering to her mysterious partner. Gasps. Actual gasps. Charles's face went pale. Jerome muttered, "Good God." Monica froze, every ounce of corporate polish evaporating. This is taken out of context. Sam, sitting in the back, stood and said, "Funny, because the context is time-stamped, backed up, and cross-verified." I clicked one final slide. Payment logs showing her communication trail with Vanguard Consulting LLC, including her personal authorization request. She lunged forward, reaching for my laptop. But before she could make contact, Malik from security, bless that man, stepped in, hand on her arm, "Calm as you please." "I think that's enough, ma'am." Her face went white. "You set me up." I smiled. "You set yourself up." I just provided lighting and sound. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. Charles finally spoke, his voice level but cold. "Monica, I'll be turning this over to legal immediately. You can wait for further instruction, or you can leave now." She hesitated, shaking, then gathered her things. The heels that once clicked with confidence now sounded like guilt echoing down the hallway. When the door closed, Nina whispered, "Damn, that was cinematic." Marco raised an imaginary glass to poetic justice, served in high definition. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not the fake kind that comes from compliance, but the real kind that comes when truth finally punches through the PowerPoint. The thing about justice is, it never arrives wearing a cape. It usually shows up in a gray suit with coffee breath and a legal pad. By Monday morning, the company's lawyer, Heather, had already said phrases like forensic accounting, fraudulent activity, and my personal favorite, termination effective immediately. Those are corporate words for we're about to air this laundry in public, and it's not going to smell like lavender. Monica's downfall spread through the office faster than a free lunch email. People whispered her name like she was a ghost that still haunted the shared drive. HR locked her account, security changed her access, and her glossy portrait was taken down from the executive wing before noon. By Tuesday, her parking space was reserved for visitors. I watched all of it with a strange cocktail of relief and regret. She'd been my wife, my rival, my storm. I didn't hate her, not really. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel poetic to see her empire collapse under the weight of her own spreadsheets. Charles called me into his office that afternoon. He had the look of a man who'd just dodged an SEC investigation. "Hell of a week," he said. "Understatement of the decade." He smiled. "The board's impressed. They've asked me to make your position official, head of a new department." I blinked. "New department?" He nodded. "Strategic Integrity Division. Your team stays intact. Bigger budget. More authority. And maybe," he added with a grin, "a lock on your office door next time." I laughed. "So, we're in charge of making sure the company doesn't hire another Monica?" "Exactly," he said. "Consider it hazard pay for surviving one." We toasted that night in our new office. A real office, not a repurposed storage closet. The lights worked. The coffee machine didn't hiss like an angry cat. Even the carpet looked like it had feelings. Zara poured champagne into mismatched mugs. To teams who save companies but never get credit. Until now. Nina raised hers. And to bosses who pretend not to panic while absolutely panicking. "Accurate," I said. Sam added. "And to accountants who get to file karma under assets." We laughed until it didn't feel like laughter. It felt like release. All those late nights, the fake layoffs, the silent panic, finally paid off. I looked around at the faces of the people who'd trusted me through all of it, who followed me into the madness and came out the other side stronger. "You know," I said, "Monica was right about one thing." Nina snorted. "That efficiency is a muscle. That some people need trimming," I said. "Just turns out it wasn't us." Marco grinned. "Damn right." Zara raised her glass again. "To surviving the storm. And thriving after it," I said. The next morning, I saw it. Someone had sent me a screenshot of Monica's LinkedIn profile. Her new headline read, "Former efficiency executive. Seeking new opportunities, preferably less legal." I laughed out loud. It was perfect, tragic, ironic, and completely on brand. I didn't wish her failure, exactly. I just hoped she'd finally realize that efficiency without empathy isn't leadership, it's demolition. As for me, I wasn't invisible anymore. Not the quiet fixer, not the shadow manager. I was officially the guy who turned a staged downfall into a promotion. I walked into the office, past my team's desks, and smiled. "All right, heroes," I said. "Back to work. Let's make integrity fashionable again." Nina raised an eyebrow. "You mean unpaid overtime?" "Yeah," I said, smirking, "but with better coffee." And as the laughter filled the room, I thought, this, right here, was what efficiency should look like. People who gave a damn, working together, without fear of being optimized out of existence. The storm was over. The calm was real this time. And for once, the spreadsheet told the truth. I found my elderly mother shivering outside my own house while my wife and her sisters threw a party inside like they owned the place. My mother whispered, "Son, why won't they let us in?" What I did next shattered their lives beyond repair. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who believes in cosmic signs or karma or whatever nonsense people post about on their Instagram stories between pictures of overpriced avocado toast. But if the universe was trying to tell me something that night, it was doing a pretty solid job of rubbing my face in it. The rain was coming down in sheets, not the romantic, movie montage kind of rain where someone runs through puddles to confess their undying love, but the angry, vindictive type that soaks through your jacket in about 3 seconds flat and makes you question every life decision that led you to standing outside in it. It was the kind of rain that felt personal, like Mother Nature herself had beef with me specifically and decided tonight was collection day. I'd parked my car 2 blocks down because apparently even finding a spot near my own house had become a competitive sport I wasn't invited to play. As I walked up the street, water squishing in my shoes with every step, I could see my house. Well, the house I thought I owned both emotionally and legally, which turned out to be a distinction that mattered more than I'd realized. The windows were lit up like Times Square on New Year's Eve, and I could hear the bass thumping from the stereo system I'd stupidly installed last year, because Serena said it would be fun for parties. Turns out she was right, just not parties I was apparently invited to or even informed about. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could make out shapes moving around inside. People were dancing, drinks were being waved around with the kind of reckless abandon that suggested nobody was worried about the security deposit, and someone had clearly decided that my living room, the living room where I watched football games in my underwear and fell asleep during documentaries about World War II, was now the hottest nightclub in a 3-block radius. The audacity was almost impressive. Almost. But then I saw her, and every sarcastic thought I'd been mentally rehearsing evaporated like spit on a hot sidewalk. There on the front step, hunched over like a question mark that nobody wanted to answer, was my mother, Ruth. Mom. The woman who'd raised me on a diet of instant oatmeal, brutally honest advice, and the occasional insult delivered with such precision it felt like a compliment. She was sitting there in the rain, wearing a coat so thin it might as well have been made of hope and good intentions, her gray hair plastered to her head, hands folded in her lap, like she was waiting for a bus that was never going to come. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up, and I swear to God, I felt something crack inside my chest. Her eyes were watery, could have been the rain, could have been tears, probably both. And her voice came out small and fragile, like a bird with a broken wing trying to convince you it could still fly. Son, she whispered, and the word carried more weight than it had any right to. Why won't they let us in? That sentence hit me like a sucker punch to the gut, the kind where you don't realize how much it hurt until you try to breathe and find out your lungs have other ideas. Between the raindrops hammering down around us and the muffled thump of whatever Go Doffel remix was playing inside, probably something with way too much auto-tune and not enough actual talent, I felt this sharp, ridiculous urge to march inside and hand everyone tiny party hats and a bill for emotional damages. I wanted to be the kind of son who burst through that door like an action hero, kicked everyone out, and delivered some perfectly scripted monologue about respect and decency that would make them all weep with shame. But then I really looked at her eyes. Not just glanced, but looked, and I saw something that made all my planned sarcasm and righteous anger shrivel up like a slug covered in salt. She wasn't just cold or wet or uncomfortable. She was hurt. Deeply, genuinely hurt in that way that goes bone deep and settles in for the long haul. And she was embarrassed, which was somehow worse, because my mother had never been embarrassed about anything in her entire life. This was a woman who'd once told off a police officer for giving her a parking ticket and somehow walked away with an apology. This was a woman who'd raised me as a single parent after Dad died and never once complained or made me feel like I was a burden. And now she was sitting on the front step of what was supposed to be her home, locked out like some kind of inconvenient package that nobody wanted to sign for, while a bunch of people who couldn't pick her out of a lineup if their lives depended on it partied inside with her furniture, her dishes, her space. The rain kept coming down, relentless and cold, turning the world into a blurry watercolor painting where nothing had solid edges anymore. I could hear laughter from inside the house, high-pitched, performative laughter that people only do when they're trying to prove how much fun they're having. Someone screamed, "Yas, Queen," and I made a mental note to find out who was responsible for that particular crime against the English language and have a serious conversation with them about their life choices. I helped Mom to her feet, feeling how her hands trembled in mine, whether from cold or emotion or both, I couldn't tell. She was lighter than I remembered, more fragile, like she'd been slowly disappearing right in front of me, and I'd been too busy, too distracted, too stupidly optimistic to notice. Her coat was soaked through completely, offering about as much protection as a paper towel in a hurricane, and I could see her shivering despite her best efforts to hide it. "Come on, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even though I felt like I was juggling grenades with the pins already pulled. "We're not staying here tonight." She looked at me with confusion mixed with relief, like someone who'd been lost for hours and finally saw a familiar landmark. Part of me wanted to storm inside right then and there, flip over tables, throw people out by their overpriced designer collars, and reclaim my space with the kind of dramatic flourish that would have made for great television. But the bigger part of me, the part that still had some connection to rational thought, knew that tonight wasn't about making a scene. Tonight was about getting my mother somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere she wasn't treated like an unwanted piece of furniture that nobody knew quite what to do with. As we walked back to my car, rain soaking us both to the bone, I glanced back at the house one more time. The party was still going strong. Nobody inside even aware that we'd been out there, that my mother had been sitting in the cold waiting for basic human decency that never came. The music thumped on, the lights flashed, and the laughter continued, oblivious and careless. And in that moment, walking through the rain with my mother's hand in mine, I made a decision. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But first, we needed dry clothes, hot tea, and a plan. Because if there's one thing my mother taught me during all those years of instant oatmeal breakfasts and brutally honest life advice, it's that revenge is a dish best served cold, preferably after you've had time to think it through, document everything, and make sure your ducks are in a row before you flip the table. The rain kept falling as we drove away, and I couldn't help but think that maybe the universe wasn't punishing me after all. Maybe it was just setting the scene for what came next. Let me take you back about 6 months, to a time when I still believed that good intentions could substitute for actual foresight, and that my marriage was built on something sturdier than Pinterest boards and filtered photographs. Dad died on a Tuesday, which felt weirdly appropriate because Tuesdays have always been the most unremarkable, forgettable day of the week. The day where nothing interesting happens except apparently your father's heart deciding it's had enough of this whole living thing and clocking out early. The funeral was your standard issue sad affair with uncomfortable folding chairs, a priest who mispronounced Dad's name 3 times despite having it written down right in front of him, and enough casseroles from well-meaning neighbors to feed a small army or at least keep us constipated for a month. Mom stood there in her black dress that she'd probably owned since the Reagan administration, dry-eyed and stoic, greeting everyone with the kind of grace that made me realize I'd inherited exactly none of her social skills. I was the one crying into my sleeve like a toddler who'd lost his favorite toy, while she shook hands and accepted condolences like she was hosting a particularly somber dinner party. That night, after everyone had finally cleared out and taken their sympathy casseroles with them, I found her sitting in Dad's armchair, the one with the permanent butt groove molded to his exact specifications after 30 years of dedicated sitting. She wasn't crying. She wasn't doing anything, really, just staring at the wall like it might suddenly reveal the secrets of the universe, or at least explain why life had to be so relentlessly unfair. And that's when I made the promise. "Mom," I said, sitting down on the ottoman that Dad always claimed was structurally unsound but never actually threw away because that's not what people of their generation did with perfectly functional furniture. "You're not going to be alone. I promise you that. You're going to move in with us, and we're going to figure this out together, okay?" She looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much. Raising a kid solo after Dad's first heart attack left him unable to work, stretching every dollar until it screamed for mercy. Putting up with my teenage years, which I'm told were particularly unbearable, though I have selectively forgotten most of the details. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart," she said. But I could hear the hope underneath the protest, like a kid pretending they don't want birthday cake, while secretly praying you're going to give them the corner piece with extra frosting. "I want to," I insisted, and here's the kicker. I actually meant it. This wasn't some guilt-driven obligation or performative son-of-the-year nonsense. This was me genuinely believing that bringing my mother into my home would be a good thing, a beautiful merging of family units, a heartwarming solution that would make everyone happy. Man, past me was an optimistic idiot of truly breathtaking proportions. When I brought it up with Serena a few days later, she was in the middle of rearranging our living room for the 4th time that month, because apparently furniture has feelings and needs to experience different views or some interior design philosophy I've never fully understood. She stopped fluffing a throw pillow. We have 7 throw pillows on our couch, and I'm allowed to use exactly 0 of them because they're decorative, and smiled in that way that I've since learned means she's already calculating how this will play on social media. "That's so sweet, babe," she said, and I remember feeling relieved because I'd half expected resistance. "Your mom is welcome here. It'll be nice having her around." Nice. That word should have been my first warning sign, right up there with fine, whatever, and it's your choice. These are not words that mean what they're supposed to mean in marriage language. These are diplomatic non-answers designed to let you think you've won while actually giving them plausible deniability later. I called her sisters next because Serena has this thing where major decisions require a family conference call, like we're running a small corporation instead of just trying to live our lives. Tanya, who works in marketing and talks like every conversation is a pitch meeting, said it would be fine and that they'd make it work. Brooke, the youngest one who went to art school for 2 years and now considers herself a creative genius despite working at a juice bar, said something about multi-generational households being very European, which I think was supposed to be a compliment, but came out sounding like she was narrating a documentary about exotic cultures. So we did it. We moved Mom in on a Saturday that was way too hot for October, and I remember thinking this was it. This was me being a good son, honoring my father's memory, keeping the family together. I'd rented a U-Haul that was comically oversized for the amount of stuff she actually owned because apparently my mother had been living like a monk who'd taken a vow of minimalism. 1 bedroom set, some kitchen items, about 1,000 books because the woman read like it was an Olympic sport, and her collection of knitted blankets that she'd been making since before I was born. At first, it was actually kind of great. Mom fit into our household like she'd always been there, which makes sense considering she'd literally trained me in the art of existing. She'd wake up early and make actual breakfast, not the grab a protein bar and run situation that Serena and I had normalized, but real food that required pans and effort. She'd sit with Ava, our 8-year-old daughter who I somehow haven't mentioned yet because I'm terrible at linear storytelling, and they'd play these elaborate card games that Mom made up on the spot with rules that changed depending on who was winning. She mended socks. Who mends socks anymore? Apparently my mother. That's who. Because throwing away perfectly good socks just because they have a hole is wasteful, and she didn't raise me to be wasteful even though I absolutely was and continue to be. She'd sit in the corner of the living room with her sewing kit, this ancient tin box covered in flowers that probably predated the moon landing, and patch up clothes that I'd have tossed in the trash without a second thought. For about 3 weeks, I walked around feeling like I'd cracked the code, like I'd figured out how to have it all. Happy wife, happy kid, happy mom, happy life. I was basically a genius at this family thing. I'd catch Serena and Mom chatting in the kitchen and think, yeah, this is working. This is exactly what I wanted. I'd see Ava climbing into Mom's lap to hear stories about when I was a kid, stories that were embarrassing but in that wholesome, isn't family wonderful kind of way, and feel this warm, fuzzy feeling that I assumed was contentment. Turns out that warm, fuzzy feeling was just naivete, keeping me comfortable while the foundation slowly cracked underneath. Because what I'd confused for my family coming together was actually just the calm before the storm, that brief period where everyone's still on their best behavior before the real personalities come out to play. I thought I was being thoughtful and considerate, bringing everyone under one roof. I thought I was honoring my promise to Dad and being the kind of son who actually showed up when it mattered. What I'd actually done was invite my mother into a situation where she'd be slowly, methodically squeezed out by people who smiled to her face and sharpened their knives when she wasn't looking. I'd brought her into a home that I thought was mine, but was really just a stage set for someone else's version of the perfect life. A version that didn't include elderly mothers who mended socks and told outdated jokes and took up space that could have been used for a yoga room or whatever the hell Serena's sisters thought was more important. But I didn't know any of that yet. I was still operating under the delusion that words like nice and fine meant what they were supposed to mean, that promises mattered, that family was supposed to stick together through the messy parts. I was still the optimistic idiot who thought he'd figured everything out, blissfully unaware that I'd actually just made the biggest mistake of my life. The thing about slow poison is that you don't notice it's killing you until you're already halfway dead. It doesn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. It just quietly goes about its business, one microscopic dose at a time, until one day you wake up and realize you can't remember what healthy felt like. That's how the changes started with Mom. So small, so subtle, so easy to write off as nothing that by the time I noticed something was actually wrong, the damage had already set up a permanent residence and started redecorating. It began with dinner, which should have been my first clue because Mom loved dinner. Not in a weird obsessive way, but in that traditional sense where sitting down together as a family was like her religion, the one ritual she refused to compromise on no matter how busy or tired or broke we were when I was growing up. We'd had some truly grim dinners over the years. I'm talking boxed mac and cheese stretched with extra butter to make it look like more, hot dogs cut up and mixed with baked beans because that counted as a complete meal in Mom's Depression-era playbook, but we always sat down together and pretended we were dining at the Ritz. So when she started skipping dinner, I should have recognized it as the red flag it was. But instead, I made excuses. I told myself she was adjusting, that she was tired, that old people eat less anyway, or whatever nonsense I'd half remembered from some article I'd skimmed while waiting for my coffee order. The first time she declined, I was loading the dishwasher, a task that apparently only I was capable of performing in our household despite everyone else having fully functioning hands. When she poked her head into the kitchen and said, "I'm not very hungry tonight, sweetheart. You all go ahead without me." "You sure, Mom?" Serena made her famous chicken thing. Famous was a generous description. Serena's cooking operated on the principle that if you put enough garlic and wine in something, it became sophisticated, regardless of whether it was actually edible. But Mom always ate it with enthusiasm and said nice things, because that's what moms do. They lie about your spouse's cooking to keep the peace. "Just tired," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and then she disappeared upstairs to her room with a cup of tea, which became her signature move over the following weeks. Just tired. Just tired. Just tired. The phrase became a mantra, a get-out-of-family-free card that I accepted without question because I was busy and distracted and apparently blind to the obvious. By week 6, Mom was practically a ghost. She'd emerge from her room in the mornings, moving through the kitchen like she was trying not to disturb the air molecules, making her tea in complete silence. She stopped joining us for breakfast, stopped offering to help with dishes, stopped sitting in the living room to watch her British mystery shows that she loved with an intensity that bordered on concerning. Instead, she'd take her tea and retreat upstairs, closing the door with such careful quietness that it somehow felt louder than if she'd slammed it. "Is Mom okay?" I asked Serena one night after we'd had dinner, another garlic and wine experiment that had turned the chicken into something resembling leather, and Mom had once again excused herself with the same tired refrain. Serena was scrolling through her phone, double-tapping photos of other people's lives with the kind of focus that suggested she was solving world hunger instead of just engaging in mindless social media validation. "She's fine," Serena said without looking up. "She's just adjusting. It's a big change for her." The way she said it, so casual and dismissive, should have bothered me more than it did. But I was in that dangerous zone of wanting to believe everything was fine because the alternative required effort and confrontation, two things I've always been exceptional at avoiding. Then the whispering started, and with it came the realization that I'd been living in a sitcom written by someone with a really dark sense of humor. Serena's sisters had always been around. They treated our house like a community center with better snacks. But suddenly they seemed to be there constantly, huddled together in various corners like they were planning a heist or starting a cult. Tanya and Brooke would show up unannounced, which was already annoying, but then they'd settle in with their expensive coffee drinks that they'd brought from outside because apparently our coffee wasn't good enough, and they'd whisper. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking, and they all look at you with those fake smiles that say, "We definitely weren't just talking about you." It was like that. Except the person they weren't talking about was my mother. They'd go quiet when she entered a room, or they'd suddenly shift to talking about something aggressively neutral like the weather or reality TV, or whether almond milk was better than oat milk, which is a debate I genuinely believe was invented to make people feel like they have opinions about something that matters when they really don't. The opinions started creeping out in small doses. Tanya mentioned that Mom's cardigan was very vintage, in a tone that suggested vintage was not a compliment, but rather a polite synonym for should have been thrown away in 1987. Brooke made a comment about how Mom folded the dish towels differently and demonstrated the correct way to fold them, which apparently involved more corners and some kind of rolling technique that seemed designed more to assert dominance than to actually improve towel storage. They'd laugh at Mom's jokes, but it was that kind of laughter that's really just performed politeness. Too loud, too long, stopping abruptly like someone had flipped a switch. Then they'd clap, actually clap, when she stopped talking, like she'd just finished some kind of performance that they were relieved had ended. Mom would smile and excuse herself, and I'd sit there feeling something twist in my gut, but not quite having the language or the courage to call it out. The worst part was watching how Mom changed under this constant low-level scrutiny. She started second-guessing herself, apologizing for things that didn't require apologies. Sorry, is this where the mugs go? I can never remember. She'd lived with us for 2 months at that point. She knew where the mugs went. But she'd ask anyway, her voice small and uncertain, looking for permission to exist in a space that was supposed to be her home. She stopped telling her stories, the ones about growing up in Pennsylvania coal country, about her own mother who could stretch a dollar so far it could circumvent the globe, about the time she accidentally set the kitchen curtains on fire trying to impress a boy by cooking him dinner. These stories had become Ava's favorites, little windows into a world that seemed simultaneously foreign and familiar, but Mom just stopped sharing them. When Ava would ask, "Grandma, tell me about when you were little," Mom would deflect with, "Oh, that's boring, sweetheart. Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" I should have said something. Every fiber of my being that wasn't completely absorbed in work deadlines and pretending my marriage was fine knew I should have said something. I should have pulled Serena aside and asked what the hell was going on. I should have told her sisters to back off, that this was Mom's home too, that respect wasn't optional. I should have sat Mom down and asked her point blank why she was hiding in her room like a prisoner instead of living like a person. But I didn't. Instead, I kept telling myself that they'd come around, that this was just an adjustment period, that everything would settle down once everyone got used to the new normal. I was a brave idiot, emphasis on the idiot part, convincing myself that ignoring a problem was the same as solving it. I'd perfected the art of looking directly at something terrible and deciding it was actually fine. Just fine, totally fine, nothing to worry about here, folks. The man who keeps telling himself that things will get better without actually doing anything to make them better is either incredibly brave or spectacularly stupid. Spoiler alert, I was definitely the latter, marinating in my own denial while my mother slowly disappeared right in front of me, one skipped dinner and one quiet retreat at a time. There are moments in life that function like a slap to the face, sudden, sharp, impossible to ignore. And then there are moments that work more like carbon monoxide poisoning, quietly filling up the room until you realize you can't breathe, and by then it's almost too late to save yourself. The night I heard them was both, which is a particularly special kind of awful that I wouldn't recommend to anyone, not even people I actively dislike. I'd left work early, which was already a minor miracle considering my boss, Derek, operated under the delusion that leaving before 7 p.m. meant you weren't committed to the company vision, or whatever corporate buzzword nonsense he'd picked up from his latest leadership podcast. But I'd wrapped up a presentation that had been hanging over my head like a sword made entirely of spreadsheets and PowerPoint slides, and I figured I'd earn the right to go home at a reasonable hour like a normal human being instead of a corporate zombie. The house was lit up when I pulled into the driveway, warm yellow lights spilling out of the windows in a way that should have looked welcoming, but instead gave me this weird feeling in my stomach, like when you're about to bite into what you think is a chocolate chip cookie, but turns out to be raisin. All the cars were there. Serena's white SUV that was way too big for someone who only drove to yoga class and the organic grocery store. Tanya's least special luxury sedan that she definitely couldn't afford, but leased anyway, because appearances matter more than financial stability. And Brooke's beat-up Honda that she'd covered in bumper stickers about saving the environment while simultaneously idling in drive-thrus for 20 minutes at a time. I sat in my car for a minute, listening to the end of a podcast about true crime because apparently I needed more darkness in my life, and watched the shadows move across the windows. Someone walked past the living room, then someone else, and I could see the flicker of what looked like candles, which meant Serena was in one of her moods where she decided our house needed ambience despite having perfectly functional electric lighting that didn't threaten to burn the place down. When I got out and walked up to the door, I could hear voices. Not loud, not shouting, but that particular frequency of conversation that people use when they think they're alone and don't need to perform civility for an audience. The front door was slightly ajar, which was weird because Serena was obsessive about locking doors, something about crime statistics she'd read on some mom blog that had convinced her we were living in a war zone instead of a quiet suburban neighborhood where the most exciting thing that happened was Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in a tree. I should have just walked in. It was my house, my door, my right to enter without skulking around like some kind of burglar. But something made me pause with my hand on the doorknob, some instinct that whispered this was one of those moments where you needed to pay attention because you weren't going to get a replay. So I stood there in my own doorway like an idiot, listening. She's taking up space. That was Brooke's voice, unmistakable with that slight vocal fry she developed after watching too many YouTube influencers. She said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather or discussing which brand of almond milk was superior. Like, I get that she's his mom and whatever, but it's awkward having her around all the time. My hand froze on the doorknob. The metal suddenly felt cold, or maybe my hand had just gone numb. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that my body had apparently decided to stop working while my brain went into overdrive trying to process what I'd just heard. It's totally awkward. That was Tanya now, her marketing executive voice clipping the words short and efficient like she was presenting quarterly earnings. Old people ruin the vibe. Like, we can't even have normal conversations anymore because we have to watch what we say. And the way she just sits there sometimes, staring, it's creepy. Plus, this house isn't that big. We need the space for when you guys have people over. She said we. Like this was her house too. Like she paid the mortgage or mowed the lawn or fixed the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom that I'd been meaning to deal with for 3 months. Like she had any right whatsoever to have opinions about who lived in my house and who didn't. There was a pause, the kind of silence that feels heavy and full of meaning, and then I heard the sound of a door clicking shut somewhere inside. Soft, careful, deliberate. And then Mom's voice, so quiet I almost missed it under the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. We shouldn't be here. She said we, and I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that she was talking to herself, or maybe to Dad's memory, or maybe just to the universe in general. We shouldn't be here. Not, I shouldn't be here. Like she was still trying to include me in her exile. Still trying to protect me even as she was being slowly crushed under the weight of other people's casual cruelty. I stood there at my own front door, rain starting to drizzle down the back of my neck because of course it was raining again, the universe apparently having decided that every terrible moment in my life needed appropriate weather to match. My pulse was doing this weird drum roll thing, like my heart was trying to break out of my chest and go solve this problem independently since my brain didn't seem to be functioning properly. The smart thing would have been to storm in right then and there. The satisfying thing would have been to kick open the door. Okay, maybe not kick because that would have hurt and possibly broken the door, but open it dramatically at least, and demand to know what the hell they thought they were doing discussing my mother like she was an inconvenient piece of furniture they were trying to get rid of. The brave thing would have been immediate confrontation, righteous anger, a speech about respect and decency that would have made them all ashamed of themselves. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I stood there in the rain and felt something cold settle over me. Something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt, but was maybe some toxic combination of both mixed with a clarity I hadn't experienced in months. It was like someone had suddenly wiped my glasses clean after I'd been walking around looking at the world through a smudged, blurry lens, and now I could see everything with perfect, terrible focus. I didn't storm in. I didn't yell. I didn't throw plates, though the thought crossed my mind and lingered there for a moment like a pleasant daydream. Instead, I backed away from the door, walked back to my car with water squishing in my shoes, and sat there in the dark with the engine off and the rain drumming on the roof. And that's when I started planning. Not the hot, emotional kind of planning where you make rash decisions you'll regret later, but the cold, methodical kind where you think through every angle and every consequence. The kind of planning that requires patience and precision and a willingness to play the long game even when every fiber of your being wants immediate satisfaction. I sat there and smiled, which probably would have looked unhinged to anyone watching. But there was nobody watching because everyone who mattered was inside my house talking about my mother like she was a problem to be solved. I smiled because I'd just realized something important. I didn't need to fight back with volume or drama or immediate confrontation. I needed to fight back with something much more effective. I needed to fight back with paperwork, with legality, with the boring, adult machinery of property law and financial documentation. I needed to build a case so airtight that when I finally did make my move, there would be no arguing, no negotiating, no room for them to wiggle out of the consequences of their own cruelty. So I started making a mental list, right there in my car with rain obscuring the windows and my mother's voice echoing in my head. Documents I'd need to gather, conversations I'd need to record, evidence I'd need to collect. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment of casual cruelty carefully documented and preserved like specimens in a lab. The rain kept falling, turning the world outside into a watercolor blur, and I sat there laying mental bricks one by one. Methodical, silent, very adult. The kind of adult who'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot or cold, but with proper legal documentation and a timeline that gives your enemies just enough rope to hang themselves. I pulled out my phone and started taking notes, my fingers moving across the screen with newfound purpose. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure my mother never had to whisper, "We shouldn't be here," ever again. Becoming a ghost in your own home is easier than you'd think. It doesn't require any special skills or supernatural abilities, just a willingness to smile when you want to scream and the ability to nod along to conversations that make you want to flip tables like Jesus in the temple, except with less religious justification and more personal vendetta. I became very good at being a ghost, which is either a useful life skill or a sign that I needed therapy, possibly both. The morning after I'd stood outside my own front door like some kind of rain-soaked stalker listening to my mother being discussed like a pest control problem, I walked into the kitchen and acted like absolutely nothing had changed. Serena was making her green smoothie, a concoction that looked like something you'd drain out of a swamp and tasted worse. And Tanya was already there at 7 in the morning because apparently she'd decided our house was now her house and boundaries were just suggestions for other people. "Morning," I said, pouring myself coffee that I'd learned to make extra strong because I needed the caffeine to fuel my performance as normal husband who hasn't heard anything suspicious. "Sleep well." "Like a baby," Serena said, which was a weird expression considering babies actually sleep terribly and wake up screaming every few hours. But I learned not to point out these logical inconsistencies because that apparently made me difficult. She kissed my cheek, leaving a weird sticky residue that might have been coconut oil or some other product from her extensive collection of things that promised to make her look younger, but mostly just made her smell like a tropical vacation gone wrong. "You're in a good mood," Tanya observed, eyeing me over her own coffee mug, one of my good mugs that I'd specifically bought for myself and that she'd apparently claimed through some kind of squatter's rights. She was wearing athleisure, which is what we call pajamas now when we want to pretend we're about to work out, even though everyone knows we're just going to wear them to brunch and call it a lifestyle choice. "Why wouldn't I be?" I said, smiling in a way that I hoped looked natural and not at all like someone who was internally screaming. "It's a beautiful day. I've got great coffee. I'm surrounded by family." I let that last word hang in the air for just a second, watching to see if either of them flinched. They didn't. Either they were better actors than I'd given them credit for, or they genuinely didn't see the irony in me talking about family, while they actively plotted to push out the woman who'd actually raised me. From that moment on, I became the most agreeable version of myself that had ever existed. When Brooke showed up later that day with ideas about how we should refresh the living room by getting rid of Mom's chair, the one she sat in to read because the light was good and the cushion had molded to her after months of use, I nodded thoughtfully and said, "Interesting idea. Let me think about it." When Serena suggested we needed the spare room for a home gym because she'd seen one on Instagram, and suddenly our lives were incomplete without a Peloton we'd never use, I said, "Maybe we should discuss budgets." I became a master of non-committal responses, of phrases that sounded like agreement but actually meant nothing. "That's worth considering. I can see your point. Let's circle back to that." Corporate speak became my shield, boring everyone into thinking I was on board while actually committing to absolutely nothing. It was like watching myself perform in a play where I was the only one who knew the real plot. But while I was busy being ghost husband during the day, I was working on something else at night. After everyone went to bed, after Serena finished her elaborate skincare routine that involved approximately 17 products and took longer than most Broadway shows, I'd wait until I heard her breathing even out into sleep, and then I'd get to work. The recorder was my first purchase, bought from some electronics store downtown, where the guy behind the counter asked zero questions about why I needed a device that could record audio for 8 hours straight. I hid it inside the ceramic base of the living room lamp, the one that Serena's interior designer friend had insisted we buy, even though it cost more than my first car and provided approximately the same amount of light as a depressed firefly. The camera was trickier. I found it online, marketed to concerned parents who wanted to spy on their nannies, which felt grimly appropriate considering I was basically spying on the people who were supposed to be my family. It was disguised as a ceramic owl, because apparently I was creating a whole ecosystem of deceptive home decor, and I placed it on the bookshelf with a clear view of the main living area. Nobody even noticed. Serena walked past it 6 times a day and never once questioned why we suddenly had an owl statue when neither of us had ever expressed any interest in owl-based decorative items. Every evening, after playing the role of agreeable husband, I'd download the footage and audio files to a cloud storage account that I'd set up specifically for this purpose. I'd sit in my car during lunch breaks, or in the bathroom at work like some kind of corporate spy, and listen to recordings of my own house. It was surreal and depressing and absolutely necessary. The things I heard would have been funny if they weren't so casually cruel. Brooke making fun of the way Mom pronounced certain words, doing an exaggerated impression that made Tanya laugh so hard she snorted. Serena sighing loudly every time Mom entered a room, like the mere presence of another human being in the house she didn't pay for was some kind of unbearable inconvenience. Tanya talking about how much better the house would look without old people furniture cluttering up the aesthetic. But the worst was the shoving. I'd thought I'd imagined it the first time I saw it on the footage. Brooke brushing past Mom in the hallway with just a little too much force, sending her stumbling slightly into the wall. But then it happened again. And again. These tiny, casual acts of physical aggression disguised as accidents, as just being in a hurry, as oops sorry didn't see there. I watched the footage on my phone during a meeting about quarterly projections, and I had to mute myself because I couldn't trust my voice to stay steady. My hands shook slightly as I saved the file, labeled it with a date and timestamp, added it to the growing folder of evidence that was becoming my entire emotional life. At the same time, I started handling the boring grown-up stuff that most people avoid until it becomes a crisis. I made appointments with lawyers, not the family lawyer that Serena knew about, but a different one, someone who specialized in property law and trusts and protecting assets from people who thought they were entitled to things that weren't theirs. His name was Richard, and he had the kind of calm, methodical demeanor that I aspired to. Like he'd seen every terrible thing humans could do to each other and was completely unsurprised by all of it. "You want to refinance?" he asked during our first meeting, looking at me over his reading glasses that he probably didn't need, but wore anyway because they made him look more lawyer-like. "Among other things," I said, and then I laid out my situation like I was describing someone else's life, keeping my voice steady and professional even though inside I felt like I was made of rage and sadness held together with duct tape and spite. Richard nodded, took notes, and didn't judge, which was refreshing considering I was basically asking him to help me legally evict my wife and her entire family from the house they thought they owned. We talked about trusts and beneficiaries and title transfers, all the boring paperwork that makes people's eyes glaze over, but that actually determines who gets what when the dust settles. I changed beneficiaries on my life insurance, which felt dramatic but also necessary. I set up a trust for Mom that would protect her even if something happened to me. I transferred titles quietly, signing papers in Richard's office during my lunch breaks, moving assets around like a magician sliding cards across a table, noticeable only when it was too late to change the trick. Serena thought I was having an affair, which was almost funny. She'd make little comments about how I was working late a lot, how I seemed distracted, how I was always on my phone. "Is everything okay?" she'd ask with that particular tone that meant she'd already decided everything was not okay, and was just waiting for me to confirm it. Just busy at work, I'd say, which wasn't technically a lie. I was busy, just not with the kind of work she thought. And every time she looked at me with suspicion, every time she made a passive-aggressive comment about my schedule, I'd smile and think about the folder on my cloud storage that was growing bigger every day. "You're being paranoid," Serena said one night when I suggested maybe her sisters didn't need to be at our house quite so often. She laughed, actually laughed, like the idea that I might have legitimate concerns was hilarious. "They're family. They're welcome here anytime. Right?" I said, nodding like I agreed. Family. And I filed that conversation away too, added it to my mental list of things that would be relevant later, in the after times, when this whole performance was over and the real show could begin. I called my preparation adult stuff, when I needed to think of it as something other than what it actually was: revenge. Cold, calculated, meticulously documented revenge that would be served with proper legal paperwork and a side of "get the hell out of my house." Because at the end of the day, that's what this was about. Not hurting them. Though I wouldn't lie and say the thought didn't bring me some satisfaction, but protecting Mom. Making sure she had a safe place to exist without being pushed, mocked, or made to feel like her presence was an inconvenience to people who had no right to judge her. The party announcement came via text message, which should have been my first warning that I was about to witness a masterclass in audacity. I was sitting in a meeting about supply chain logistics, the kind of meeting where people use words like synergy and optimization while secretly planning what they're going to eat for lunch, when my phone buzzed with a message from Serena. "Having a few people over tonight. Small gathering. Don't worry about it. Already handled everything." The exclamation points were doing a lot of heavy lifting in that message, trying to make it sound casual and fun when what it actually meant was, "I'm throwing a party at your house without consulting you, and you're going to smile about it." The "don't worry about it" was particularly galling, as if my main concern about surprise parties in my own home was whether or not I'd have to contribute to the planning rather than, the basic concept of being consulted about events happening in the space I paid for. I texted back a thumbs up emoji because I'd learned that emojis were a great way to communicate absolutely nothing while seeming engaged, and then I spent the rest of the meeting calculating how much this small gathering was going to cost me. Serena's idea of small was like a rich person's idea of a starter home. Technically accurate, but wildly disconnected from normal human reality. When I got home that evening, earlier than usual because I had a bad feeling about this whole situation, I discovered I'd vastly underestimated the situation. The house looked like someone had decided to throw a wedding reception without the benefit of actual marriage or planning permission. There were catering vans in my driveway, actual vans plural, and people were carrying in trays of food that probably cost more per ounce than gold. Someone had installed what appeared to be a floral wall in my living room, an entire wall made of flowers, which seemed both excessive and like a fire hazard, though I wasn't sure which concerned me more. The playlist was already going, some kind of curated Spotify nonsense that was trying very hard to be sophisticated but mostly sounded like elevator music had a baby with a department store and they'd raised it on pretension. I could hear Serena's laugh from somewhere inside, that particular high-pitched performance laugh she did when she was trying to impress people, the one that sounded like someone had told her laughing was supposed to happen but hadn't explained how to do it naturally. Surprise! Tanya appeared in the doorway wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment and holding a glass of wine that I definitely hadn't bought. "Isn't this great?" Serena really outdid herself. "With my credit card, I assume," I said, keeping my voice light even though I wanted to ask approximately 17 questions starting with "Who authorized this?" and ending with "Are you all completely insane?" But I was ghost husband now, the agreeable phantom who nodded and smiled while internally documenting everything for future legal proceedings. "Oh, don't be boring," she said, waving her hand dismissively like my concern about finances was some kind of personality flaw rather than basic adult responsibility. "You only live once. Besides, Serena deserves nice things. She works so hard." I almost asked what exactly Serena worked hard at, considering she hadn't had a job since we got married, and her primary activities seemed to involve rearranging furniture and having opinions about throw pillows, but I swallowed the comment because I was saving my energy for bigger battles. This was just a skirmish. The war was coming later, and I needed to keep my powder dry, which is a saying I'd learned from Dad and never fully understood, but which seemed appropriate for my current situation of strategic patience. That's when I saw Mom's taxi pull up. I hadn't even known she'd left the house, which should have concerned me more than it did, but I'd been so focused on playing my role that I'd stopped tracking her movements like I should have been. The taxi, one of those beat-up sedans that smelled like air freshener fighting a losing battle against decades of passengers, pulled up to the curb, and Mom got out slowly, carefully, like someone who wasn't entirely sure they were welcome in their own home. She stood at the gate, and I watched through the window as she took in the scene. The lights, the noise, the obvious celebration happening inside. She was wearing her good coat, the one she saved for church and doctor's appointments. The one that was still somehow too thin for the weather because she'd bought it on clearance 20 years ago and refused to replace it as long as it still functioned. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she was shivering despite her best efforts to hide it. Through the window, I could see Serena and her sisters inside, practicing their toasts on my couch like they were rehearsing for opening night of a play nobody had asked to see. Brooke was holding a champagne glass, champagne I definitely hadn't purchased, and saying something that made Tanya throw her head back in exaggerated laughter. They were completely oblivious to the woman standing outside in the cold, the woman whose home this was supposed to be, the woman who was quite literally being kept out in the cold while they celebrated whatever the hell they thought they were celebrating. The audacity was so profound it should have been classified as a natural resource. The sheer nerve required to throw a party in someone's house, while simultaneously excluding the person who actually had more right to be there than anyone else, was Olympic-level entitlement. If they bottled this kind of audacity and sold it, they could solve the national debt. They could probably solve world hunger. They could definitely power a small city for a year. I stood there for exactly 3 seconds, watching Mom try to make herself smaller, watching her pull her thin coat tighter like that would somehow make her less cold or less unwelcome, and something in me just snapped. Not the hot, angry kind of snapping where you do something stupid and regrettable, but the cold, clear kind where you suddenly see the situation for exactly what it is, and you know precisely what needs to happen next. I walked past Tanya without saying a word, past the catering staff who were setting up a champagne tower, in my living room, on a Tuesday, and out the front door. Mom looked up when she heard the door open, and her face did this complicated thing where relief and shame and love all competed for dominance. She looked at me like someone asking a favor they were too proud to beg for, like someone who'd been taught their whole life not to be a burden and was now living proof that she'd learned that lesson too well. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "You're not staying here tonight." Her face fell, and I realized how that sounded, like I was joining the exile, like I was one more person telling her she wasn't wanted. So I quickly added, "You're staying somewhere better. Somewhere you'll actually be treated like a human being instead of an inconvenience." I led her to my car, which I'd parked 2 streets away specifically to avoid the circus in my driveway, and helped her into the passenger seat. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who'd been folded up too long and was still remembering how to unfold. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "The Kingsley," I said, naming the one nice hotel in our town, the one where people stayed for anniversaries and special occasions, the one with the fancy lobby and the restaurant that had cloth napkins. They have a proper tea service. Real tea, not that herbal nonsense. And significantly less condescension than what you'd find back there. She smiled then, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. It was a small smile, tentative and fragile like something that had been broken and was just starting to remember how to be whole again. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. But you should go back to your party." "It's not my party," I said, starting the car and pulling away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see my house lit up like a beacon, hear the faint thump of bass from the ridiculous sound system, see shadows of people moving behind the windows like they belonged there more than we did. "It's definitely not my party." We drove in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that happens between people who've known each other long enough that every moment doesn't need to be filled with conversation. Mom kept stealing glances at me like she wasn't entirely sure this was really happening, like she was waiting for me to turn the car around and tell her this was a mistake. When we pulled up to the Kingsley, the doorman actually opened the car door for her, a real doorman in an actual uniform, treating my mother like she was someone who mattered instead of someone who needed to make herself invisible. I checked her into a suite, not a room but a suite, because if I was going to rack up credit card debt it might as well be for something worthwhile, instead of champagne towers and floral walls. "This is too much," Mom protested as we walked through the lobby with its marble floors and its chandelier that probably cost more than most people's cars. But she was smiling, really smiling, and her shoulders had straightened slightly, like she was remembering how to take up space again. "It's not enough," I said, and I meant it. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. But tonight, you're going to have room service and decent tea and a bed that doesn't come with a side of passive-aggressive comments." I got her settled in the suite, made sure she knew how to work the TV remote, which was unnecessarily complicated because apparently even hotel remotes have gotten too sophisticated for their own good, and showed her the tea service menu which was extensive enough to qualify as light reading. The hotel room I'd booked for myself was 3 doors down from Mom's suite, which felt both close enough to be responsible and far enough away to give her privacy, a concept that had apparently been extinct in my house for the past several months. It was a basic room, nothing fancy, no chandelier or marble bathroom like Mom's suite. But it had a bed, a desk, and most importantly, a door that locked and kept out people I didn't want to deal with, which at this point was approximately everyone except my mother and possibly Ava, though even that was complicated. I barely slept, which wasn't surprising considering my brain had decided this was the perfect time to process every terrible decision I'd made over the past 6 months, while simultaneously planning the most elaborate interpersonal demolition project of my life. Sleep is for people who aren't mentally cataloging evidence and rehearsing conversations that would probably sound way better in their heads than they would in actual reality. I brought my laptop, and I spent most of the night organizing files like some kind of obsessed librarian preparing for the most important presentation of their career. I had folders within folders, each one labeled with dates and times and brief descriptions that sounded clinical and detached, because that's how you had to approach this stuff if you wanted to maintain any semblance of sanity. Audio_11_15_kitchen_comments. Video_11_22_ hallway_incident. Text_messages_various_dates. It was like creating a museum exhibit titled The Slow Erosion of Human Decency, a multimedia experience. I polished transcripts until my eyes burned, reading the same cruel comments over and over until they stopped feeling like words and started feeling like evidence, which was exactly what they were. I labeled files with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that I usually reserve for work presentations, except this time the stakes were significantly higher than quarterly sales figures or customer retention rates. Every time I wanted to close the laptop and just try to sleep like a normal person, I'd remember Mom sitting on that front step in the rain, or standing at the gate tonight shivering in her thin coat, and my hands would go right back to the keyboard. Fury was keeping me awake, but it was a quiet fury, the kind that doesn't explode outward but instead burns steadily like a pilot light, just waiting for the right moment to ignite everything around it. Around 3 in the morning, I started rehearsing lines in my head, trying out different ways to say what needed to be said. Some versions were too aggressive. I didn't want to come across as unhinged, even though I felt pretty unhinged at the moment. Some were too passive. I wasn't about to apologize my way through a confrontation that I'd been planning for weeks. I needed something that landed right in the middle, firm but calm, clear but not cruel, devastating but somehow still civilized. "You have 30 minutes to leave" felt too dramatic, like I was channeling some kind of action movie villain. "I think it's time we discuss some changes" felt too weak, like I was asking permission instead of stating facts. "This is my house, and you need to go" was accurate, but lacked the kind of procedural weight I was going for. I kept workshopping phrases like some kind of deranged screenwriter, trying to find the perfect combination of words that would convey both legal authority and personal disappointment. I kept a running joke in my head, which probably said something concerning about my mental state. You can't evict people from your heart, but you can definitely evict them from your house with proper documentation and a good lawyer. It made me smile briefly in the dark hotel room, which felt like a small victory. Revenge shouldn't be joyless, I decided. It should have at least a little bit of satisfaction mixed in, like adding salt to a recipe, enough to enhance the flavor without overwhelming everything else. Around 4:30, when the sky was just starting to think about maybe considering the possibility of getting lighter, I gave up on sleep entirely and ordered room service. Coffee, mostly, because I was going to need approximately all the caffeine that had ever existed to get through what was coming. The guy who delivered it looked exhausted, which made two of us, and I tipped him extra because we were both awake at an ungodly hour, and that created a kind of solidarity. The coffee was actually good, which surprised me. Hotel coffee usually tasted like someone had passed hot water through a dirty sock, but this was smooth and dark and strong enough to strip paint, which was exactly what I needed. I sat at the small desk and stared at my laptop screen, at the folders full of evidence, at the careful documentation of cruelty disguised as family. Morning light arrived slowly, creeping through the curtains like it wasn't entirely sure it was welcome, accompanied by the smell of someone else's breakfast tray rolling past in the hallway. Bacon, if I wasn't mistaken, which made my stomach remind me that I'd forgotten to eat dinner last night in all the chaos. But I ignored it because I had more important things to focus on, like calling my lawyer and setting into motion the series of events that would finally end this nightmare. I pulled up Naomi's number in my phone. I'd saved her as property attorney instead of her name in case anyone ever looked, which was probably paranoid, but seemed reasonable given my current circumstances. She told me to call any time I was ready to move forward, that she'd make herself available regardless of the hour, which was either dedication to her craft or a sign that she really needed the billable hours. Either way, I appreciated it. I stared at the number for a solid minute, my thumb hovering over the call button. This was it, the point of no return, the moment where I stopped being ghost husband and started being actual person with boundaries and legal representation. Once I made this call, there was no taking it back, no pretending everything was fine, no more playing along with the fiction that this was a family instead of a hostile takeover disguised as domestic life. My hand was steadier than I expected when I finally pressed call. The phone rang twice before Naomi picked up, her voice alert despite it being barely 6 in the morning. Lawyers were apparently a different breed of human, capable of full consciousness at hours when normal people were still negotiating with their alarm clocks. "It's time," I said, and my voice came out calmer than I felt, which was good because I was going for collected and strategic rather than unhinged and emotional. "I'm ready to move forward with everything we discussed." "You're sure?" she asked, not because she doubted me, but because good lawyers always confirm before launching nuclear options. "Once we start this process, it's going to move quickly. There's no pause button." "I'm sure," I said, and I was. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. They threw a party last night. In my house. While my mother stood outside in the cold because they wouldn't let her in. So yeah, I'm extremely sure. There was a pause, and I could hear her typing in the background, probably pulling up files or making notes or whatever lawyers did at 6 in the morning when their clients finally snapped. "Okay," she said, and her voice had shifted into business mode, efficient and focused. "I'll draw up the final paperwork today. We can move as early as this evening if you want. I assume you have copies of everything we discussed." "Everything," I confirmed, glancing at my laptop where months of documentation sat organized and ready. Audio, video, text messages, financial records, all of it. Time-stamped, backed up in 3 different locations, probably more evidence than we actually need, but I wasn't taking any chances. "Good," Naomi said, and I could hear the approval in her voice. "Meet me at my office at 4. We'll go over everything one final time, make sure all the paperwork is in order, and then we'll pay them a visit. I'll bring Jerry. He's my paralegal, former Marine. Looks intimidating, which helps in these situations, even though he's actually a sweetheart. Sometimes visual presence matters as much as legal documentation." We talked logistics for another 10 minutes. Who would say what order things would happen in, what the likely reactions would be, and how to handle them. Naomi had done this kind of thing before, apparently, which was both reassuring and depressing. Reassuring because it meant she knew what she was doing, depressing because it meant this situation was common enough that there was an actual protocol for it. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet hotel room and felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there. It wasn't going anywhere anytime soon, but it was organized now, purposeful, directed at a specific goal rather than just floating around making me miserable. I was done being the nice guy who let people walk all over him in the name of keeping the peace. I was done pretending that silence was the same as strength, that tolerance was the same as wisdom. I opened my laptop one more time and did a final review of everything. Every file, every folder, every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past weeks. It was all there, a comprehensive record of exactly how badly people could behave when they thought nobody was paying attention. This wasn't just about getting revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. This was about flipping the board, changing the game entirely, making it clear that actions had consequences even when you thought you were untouchable. Walking into my own living room at 9:30 in the morning felt like entering a crime scene. Except the crime was against basic decency, and the perpetrators were still lounging around like they owned the place. The party debris was everywhere, champagne glasses on every surface, plates with half-eaten appetizers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. That ridiculous floral wall, now looking wilted and sad like it regretted its life choices. The whole scene had the distinct aroma of expensive mistakes mixed with the kind of entitlement that should require a permit. Serena was on the couch, my couch, technically, though that was about to become a very relevant distinction, wearing what I'd learned to recognize as her morning after hosting look, which meant designer loungewear that cost more than most people's rent and the kind of perfectly messy hair that took 45 minutes to achieve. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking at photos from last night's party to post on Instagram with some caption about being blessed or living her best life or whatever aspirational nonsense was trending this week. She looked up when I walked in, and her face did this complicated thing where surprise mixed with irritation mixed with a hint of guilt, though the guilt disappeared pretty quickly. "You're home early," she said, like I was the one who'd done something wrong by showing up at my own house during reasonable hours. "Where were you?" "I called like 6 times. "Out," I said, setting my keys on the table with deliberate casualness. Like this was any normal morning and not the beginning of the most dramatic conversation of my marriage. "Needed some air. Clear my head. You know how it is." Tanya emerged from the kitchen holding a mimosa. A mimosa at 9:30 in the morning, which suggested that either the party was still technically continuing or she had a drinking problem, possibly both. She was wearing one of those athleisure sets that cost approximately 1 month's worth of groceries and somehow managed to look both expensive and like pajamas at the same time. The party was amazing, she announced to nobody in particular, like she was narrating a documentary about her own life. "We were just saying what a great time everyone had. You should have stayed." The casual dismissal in her voice, the implication that I was somehow deficient for not enjoying a surprise party thrown in my own house without my permission, was so perfectly Tanya that I almost admired it. "I'm sure it was great," I said, and I let just enough edge creep into my voice that she looked at me a little more carefully, like she was finally starting to suspect that something might be off. "Where's Brooke?" "Upstairs in the guest room," Serena said, emphasizing guest room slightly, which was her passive-aggressive way of reminding me that Mom's room had been redesignated without my input. "She crashed here last night. Too much champagne." She said it fondly, like being too drunk to drive home was a charming personality quirk rather than a sign of poor judgment and possibly a problem. Perfect. Everyone was here. No need to make multiple trips. I walked over to the coffee table, the one that Serena had insisted we buy from some boutique furniture store because apparently normal furniture stores weren't good enough, and cleared off the collection of champagne glasses and abandoned appetizers with more force than necessary. A few glasses clinked together dangerously, and Serena made a noise of protest, but I ignored her. Then I set down the folder. It was thick. Months of documentation don't fit in a slim folder, and it made a satisfying thunk when it hit the table, like a judge's gavel opening court. The folder was plain manila, which somehow made it more intimidating than if I'd chosen something fancy. This was serious business, not a presentation. "What's that?" Serena asked, and I could hear the wariness creeping into her voice now. She'd been married to me long enough to recognize when something was about to happen, even if she couldn't quite figure out what yet. "This," I said, opening the folder and spreading out the contents like I was dealing cards in the world's worst poker game, "is everything. Photos, audio transcripts, bank statements, text messages, video stills. A comprehensive collection of exactly how you and your sisters have treated my mother over the past several months." I laid them out methodically, creating a visual timeline of cruelty. Photos of Mom looking increasingly withdrawn and unhappy. Transcripts of conversations where they mocked her behind her back. Bank statements showing exactly how much their small gatherings had cost. Text messages where they discussed how to handle the old lady situation, like she was a pest control problem rather than a human being. Serena's face had gone pale, which was impressive considering how much makeup she was wearing. "You've been recording us?" Her voice was high and tight, equal parts outraged and panicked. "That's illegal." "Actually, it's not," I said calmly, and I'd checked this extensively with Naomi because I wasn't about to screw this up on a technicality. "This is my house. I'm allowed to record what happens in my own property, especially when I have reasonable suspicion that abuse is occurring." Which, as you can see from the evidence, I did. Tanya had stopped drinking her mimosa and was staring at the photos like they were written in a foreign language. "This is insane," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at a transcript of a conversation where she'd suggested that Mom accidentally tripped down the stairs as a way to solve the problem, which she'd clearly meant as a joke, but which looked significantly less funny when written down and presented as evidence. "What's insane?" Brooke appeared at the top of the stairs, looking like she'd just woken up, which she probably had. Her hair was doing things that defied both gravity and explanation, and she was wearing one of my t-shirts, which I noted with irritation because I'd been looking for that shirt for weeks. "Why does everyone look so serious?" "Come down here," I said, and something in my voice made her comply immediately, descending the stairs with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was still slightly drunk or possibly just beginning to realize that this was not going to be a fun morning. I waited until she was standing there with her sisters, all three of them clustered together like they could somehow form a protective barrier against reality. Then I pulled out my phone, the one that had been recording their conversations for weeks, the one they'd walked past 1,000 times without ever suspecting. "I'm going to play something for you," I said, scrolling to one of the particularly damning recordings. "And I want you to listen very carefully." I pressed play, and Brooke's voice filled the room, tinny but clear through the phone's speaker. "She's taking up space. Like, I get that she's his mom and whatever, but it's awkward having her around all the time." Then Tanya's voice, agreeing enthusiastically. Then laughter, their laughter at my mother's expense. I watched their faces change color in real time, like watching a traffic light malfunction. Brooke went red, then white, then a kind of grayish color that suggested either shame or nausea, possibly both. Tanya's face had frozen into an expression of horror that would have been funny if this weren't so serious. Serena just stared at the phone like it was a bomb that might explode at any moment. The recording kept playing. More conversations, more mockery, more casual cruelty delivered with the kind of thoughtless ease that made it somehow worse than if it had been deliberate. They'd hurt my mother without even trying, without even thinking about it, just as a natural byproduct of existing in the same space as someone they considered beneath them. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, could hear someone's phone buzzing with a notification, could hear Tanya's breath coming fast and shallow like she was trying not to hyperventilate. "You can't do this," Serena said finally, and her voice had shifted from outrage to desperate. "This is our home. You can't just—" "Actually, I can," I interrupted, and I pulled out another set of papers from the folder, the ones that Naomi had prepared with such meticulous care. "Because as of 2 weeks ago, this house was transferred into a trust for my mother, specifically. Her name is on everything that matters now. The deed, the mortgage, all of it. Your names." I made a show of looking at the papers. "Not on anything. Not anymore." The words landed like physical blows. I watched comprehension dawn on their faces, watched them realize that this wasn't just about hurt feelings or marital problems. This was about cold, hard legal reality. They'd been playing house with someone else's property, and now the bill had come due. "That's not possible," Tanya said, but she sounded uncertain now, like she was trying to convince herself rather than me. "You can't just change ownership of a house without." "Without what?" "Without permission from people who don't own it." I smiled, and it probably wasn't a nice smile. "I absolutely can. I did. It's done. Right on cue." And honestly, Naomi's timing was impeccable. There was a knock on the door. I opened it to find Naomi standing there with Jerry, Her paralegal, who looked exactly as advertised, former Marine, built like he could bench press a car, wearing a suit that somehow made him look even more intimidating. He had a briefcase that was definitely just for show because we'd already handled all the paperwork, but the visual effect was exactly what we needed. "Ladies," Naomi said pleasantly, stepping into the room with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the law was entirely on your side. "I'm Naomi Richardson, property attorney. This is Jerry. We're here to facilitate a smooth transition of possession." She said it so politely, like she was offering them tea instead of eviction. Jerry set the briefcase down on the coffee table, right on top of the evidence I'd laid out, and opened it to reveal more papers, more documents, more proof that this wasn't a bluff or an emotional outburst, but a carefully planned legal action. Naomi had a way of explaining legal documents that made you feel like you were being educated rather than destroyed, which was a valuable skill in her profession and particularly useful in this specific situation where three women were actively realizing their entire world was collapsing. She laid out the papers with the precision of a surgeon, each document representing another nail in the coffin of their comfortable delusion that this house, this life, belonged to them in any meaningful way. "As you can see here," she said, pointing to a highlighted section with the kind of calm that comes from delivering bad news professionally for a living. "The property was refinanced and transferred into an irrevocable trust on November 3rd. The beneficiary is Ruth Pemberton, with her son as trustee. The mortgage has been restructured, all equity redistributed, and all previous claims to the property have been legally dissolved." She spoke in that particular lawyer language that sounded almost friendly but was actually devastating, like someone explaining how a bomb worked while it was actively exploding. Jerry stood behind her, silent and imposing, his presence a physical reminder that this wasn't a negotiation or a discussion. This was a done deal being politely explained to people who no longer had any say in the matter. "This is insane," Brooke said, and her voice had gone up about an octave, sliding into that register that suggested she was about to either cry or start breaking things, possibly both. "You can't just kick us out. Serena lives here. This is her home." "Actually," Naomi said, and I noticed how she managed to make that word sound both polite and absolutely final. "This is Ruth Pemberton's home. Serena has been residing here as a guest of the property owner, a status which can be revoked at any time with proper notice. Which brings us to this." She slid another document across the table, this one with an official-looking header that screamed legal consequences. "What's that?" Serena's voice was barely a whisper now. All her earlier confidence evaporated like water on a hot sidewalk. She was staring at the document like it might bite her, which in a metaphorical sense, it absolutely would. "Eviction notice," Naomi said simply. 30 days is standard, but given the documented harassment and the hostile living environment created for the property owner, we're exercising the option for immediate removal. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings and vacate the premises. The silence that followed was so profound it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. I could see the exact moment the words registered, could watch the comprehension spread across their faces like spilled ink on paper. 30 minutes. Not 30 days, not a week to figure things out, but 30 actual minutes to pack up and get out. 30 minutes? Tanya's voice cracked on the words. "That's not even legal. You can't do that. There are laws about this kind of thing, tenant rights, procedures." "There are indeed laws." Jerry spoke for the first time, and his voice was surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could break concrete with his bare hands. "And we followed every single one of them. You're not tenants. You never signed a lease, never paid rent, never had any legal standing as residents. You're guests who've overstayed your welcome, and the property owner has the right to ask you to leave immediately." "I'm his wife," Serena said, and there was desperation in her voice now. That particular kind of panic that comes from realizing that the identity you'd built your entire life around suddenly doesn't carry the weight you thought it did. You can't evict your own wife. I'd been quiet through most of this, letting Naomi handle the legal explanations because that's what I was paying her for, and because she was significantly better at remaining calm and professional than I was in this moment. But now I stepped forward, and I looked at Serena with all the accumulated hurt and anger and disappointment of the past several months. "I can't evict my wife," I agreed, and I watched hope flicker across her face for just a second before I continued. but I can't enforce the property rights of my mother, who owns this house, and who you've been systematically abusing while pretending to be family. And honestly, Serena, after everything I've seen and heard these past months, the word wife is starting to feel more like a legal technicality than an actual description of what we are to each other." She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up my hand. I wasn't done. "You locked my mother out of her own home last night while you threw a party. You and your sisters have spent months making her feel unwelcome, mocking her, pushing her around, treating her like she was an inconvenience instead of a person. And you did it all while smiling to my face and pretending everything was fine." "We didn't mean," Brooke started, but I cut her off. "You did mean it. That's the thing. You absolutely meant it. Maybe you didn't think about it. Maybe it just came naturally to you. But you meant every word, every shove, every dismissive comment. And now there are consequences." I checked my watch with deliberate slowness. 28 minutes now. "I'd suggest you start packing." What followed was chaos of the most satisfying variety. Serena's wailing filled the house, a sound somewhere between genuine distress and performative outrage, the kind of crying that's designed to make you feel guilty, except I'd apparently used up my entire supply of guilt over the past few months and had none left to give. "You can't do this," she kept repeating, like maybe if she said it enough times reality would rearrange itself to accommodate her preferences. Tanya went straight into denial mode, pulling out her phone and frantically calling someone. Probably her own lawyer, though I suspected that conversation was going to be short and unsatisfying when they confirmed that yes, actually, I could do exactly this. She paced around the living room like a caged animal, her expensive athleisure outfit suddenly looking less fashionable and more like the costume of someone who'd fundamentally misunderstood their own situation. Brooke just stood there for a minute, looking genuinely shocked, before something in her face hardened and she ran upstairs to start grabbing things. I could hear her opening drawers and slamming them closed, hear the sounds of hasty packing that suggested she was finally taking this seriously. They shoved jewelry into purses, jewelry I'd probably paid for at some point, though I couldn't prove it and honestly didn't care enough to try. They grabbed clothes and shoes and whatever else they deemed essential for their immediate survival outside of the house they'd taken for granted. They cursed at me, at each other, at the universe in general, with the kind of creative profanity that suggested they'd been holding back on their vocabulary choices for months and were now letting it all out at once. The soundtrack was spectacular. Doors slamming, people shouting, someone, I think it was Tanya, actually throwing something that shattered, which I made a mental note to document for potential property damage claims. It was like watching a bad reality show, except this was my actual life, and I was simultaneously the producer, the audience, and somehow the villain, even though I was pretty sure I was actually the hero of this particular story. I stood by the window and watched it all with what I can only describe as stunned satisfaction. That particular cocktail of emotions where you feel bad about feeling good about something bad happening to people who probably deserved it, but maybe not quite this dramatically. When they finally left. 32 minutes later, because Serena needed those extra 2 minutes to deliver a dramatic monologue about betrayal that would have been more effective if she hadn't been holding a designer handbag stuffed with my probably expensive throw pillows, the house breathed. Literally breathed, like it had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. The silence that settled in after the door slammed for the final time wasn't empty or sad. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels like relief. I stood in the wreckage of the living room for a minute, surrounded by abandoned champagne glasses and wilted flowers, and felt absolutely nothing except maybe tired. The dramatic confrontation I'd been building toward for weeks was over, and instead of feeling triumphant or vindicated, I mostly just wanted a nap and maybe a sandwich. Mom arrived an hour later in a taxi I'd arranged, and when she walked through the door, she stopped completely, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to enter her own house. Her hands were shaking slightly when I pressed the keys into them, the physical weight of ownership settling into her palm. "This is your home now," I said, and I meant it in every legal and emotional sense. "Completely yours. No conditions, no strings, no one to tell you where you can sit or what stories you're allowed to tell." She looked at the keys like they were sacred relics, turning them over in her fingers with the kind of reverence usually reserved for important documents or family heirlooms. Then she laughed, actually laughed, a sound that was half joy and half disbelief. And then she cried, tears running down her face while she smiled, emotions mixing together in that messy, complicated way that feelings do when you've been holding them in for too long. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, and I hugged her because words weren't really necessary at that moment. Life didn't magically fix itself overnight like some kind of fairy tale where everything gets resolved in the final scene. The house still needed work. There were scuffs on the walls from hurried packing, a broken vase in the hallway that I'd need to clean up, that ridiculous floral wall that would require professional removal. The garden had been neglected and looked like it was staging a rebellion against organized plant life. But slowly, steadily, things patched themselves together. Mom started cooking again, real meals that filled the house with actual food smells instead of whatever expensive candle scent Serena had been obsessed with. She reclaimed her chair, her space, her right to exist without apologizing for it. Ava started coming over more. That's a whole other complicated story involving custody arrangements and difficult conversations. But when she did come, she'd curl up with her grandmother and listen to those stories about Pennsylvania coal country that she'd missed. Serena called 6 times in as many days, her voicemails evolving from angry to apologetic to desperate and finally to resigned. Each message was basically a script, some version of "I'm sorry," or "We need to talk," or "This isn't fair," and I let every single one go to voicemail. I'd listen to them once, file them away with the rest of my evidence collection, and then delete them from my phone if not from the cloud storage where everything lived permanently. Sometimes you collect voicemails like museum pieces, interesting artifacts from a previous era of your life, worth preserving for documentation purposes, but not worth responding to or putting on display in your actual living room. They existed in their own separate space, proof that it all really happened, but no longer relevant to the present moment. In the end, I didn't just reclaim a house with its mortgage and its scuffed walls and its garden full of rebellious plants. I reclaimed something bigger. Decency, self-respect, the basic principle that family means something more than shared DNA or legal documents. And I learned things that seemed obvious in hindsight but apparently needed to be learned through experience. Never underestimate your mother's capacity for resilience or her appetite for properly brewed tea. And never mistake silence for weakness just because someone chooses patience over immediate confrontation. Also, and this is a small tip for any future in-laws who might be reading this as some kind of cautionary tale. If you're going to throw a party in someone else's house, at least have the basic decency to vacuum afterward. And maybe, just maybe, consider whether the person whose name is on the mortgage might have opinions about champagne towers in their living room.